Everyone, the February 15th, 2022 virtual meeting of the Anne Arundel County Council is now in session. Madam Secretary, please call the roll.
Miss Lacey.
Present.
Miss Pickard. Miss Pickard hasn't joined us yet. Mr. Volke.
Present.
Mr. Pruski.
Here.
Miss Fiedler. Miss Fiedler should be joining us any moment here as well. Miss Rodvian.
Present.
I'm aware that Miss Hare is stuck in court this morning. She'll join us when she can. Miss Schuett. I can see you. Miss Bolayer.
Present.
Madam Chair, it looks like we have 4 council members currently in attendance. We have our legislative council up. There's Miss Pickard. We have Miss Bolayer, our county auditor. You have a quorum. You are set to go.
Thank you very much. This morning, we will begin with a federal update from Senator Chris Van Hollen. Senator, you have the floor, or your representatives have the floor. Thank you so much for being with us today.
Terry, you need to unmute yourself. I'm sorry.
Good morning. I am not Senator Van Hollen. I am Terry Weathers, his Deputy Chief of Staff. The senator should be logging in very shortly.
Ms. Weathers, do we know about how long? Is it a couple of minutes or more than a couple of minutes? Because
Seconds. You should see him in the waiting room.
Oh. I do see him. He is joining us.
And it looks like Ms. Fiedler has joined us as well.
Good morning, Ms. Fiedler.
Good morning.
Good morning, all. How are you?
Good morning. Thanks again for joining us. Yes, good to see you.
Likewise.
So you have the floor. We're ready whenever you are.
Oh, thank you. Well, listen, I appreciate the chance to meet with you. And let me start, Madam Chair and members of the council, by thanking you for all your work during these trying times with respect to defeating the pandemic and also dealing with the economic hardships that resulted from the pandemic. What I thought I would do is just briefly cover some of the things we've done and that we're doing, and then look forward to any questions or comments you may have. It was about a year ago now, a little less than a year ago, that we passed the American Rescue Plan, which provided assistance in many different ways, directly to all of our constituents in the form of individual payments, to small businesses through the Paycheck Protection Program, to nonprofits, to venues, because so many families, workers, and businesses were hit hard by the economic fallout from the pandemic. And that American Rescue Plan was essential to providing an economic safety net and has resulted in increased job growth over the last year compared to what was expected. It also, as you know, provided direct assistance to schools in Anne Arundel County, to colleges, both 2-year and 4-year, as well as directly to the county government. And the county will receive a total of $120 million in 2 tranches. The first tranche, as you well know, you've received. The second tranche should come later this summer, around June, once all the paperwork's been filed as to how the first round was spent. Maybe that's even been done already. There was also the emergency rental assistance, and I know Anne Arundel County has spent some of it, but still has some of those funds to spend if it so chooses. I did want to also emphasize the funds that are available at the state level, because I know that you're in touch with your delegation to the Maryland General Assembly. There's $3.7 billion in federal funds that went to the state. Again, in 2 tranches, they already got the first half. That has meant that they have a surplus, and they're in the process of deciding how best to invest those resources. And I just mentioned that because obviously Anne Arundel County has lots of important needs when it comes to investments. Now, beyond the American Rescue Plan, we also passed, as you know, the Infrastructure Modernization Bill. That will mean $7 billion coming to the state of Maryland over the next 5 years. And those funds have already started to flow, a big sum of money for bridge repair, others for highways, and that will continue to roll out. And once again, Anne Arundel County obviously has a stake in that. Those funds, the $7 billion over 5 years, flow through the state, through the Transportation Trust Fund. And so we are going to look forward to working with you and the General Assembly delegation from Anne Arundel County on the use of those funds. Now, beyond the $7 billion that comes directly to Maryland, there are also large federal funds that are competitively bid. For example, for resilience, building up resilience and infrastructure, which of course is a big issue for Anne Arundel County, in Annapolis and elsewhere in the county. And, you know, we worked last year to secure $3 million in federal funding for the Annapolis Dock project. That the total price tag there, as you know, is $60 million. And I think that this additional federal infrastructure fund, you know, should provide additional funds for that purpose through the competitive process. We also made sure that Anne Arundel was designated as a disaster area after Hurricane Ida, which provided small businesses and others in Anne Arundel County with access to relief. Two other points here in closing. We're trying to complete our fiscal year 2022 appropriations plan. Right now at the federal level, as you know, we're kind of on automatic pilot with last fiscal year's budget. We're hoping by March 11th to have a replacement that reflects the priorities for this year. And, you know, Anne Arundel County, especially because you're home to some big federal facilities, you know, Fort Meade and U.S. Cyber Command, one of the largest, if not the largest employer in the state, obviously has a lot at stake there in trying to update and refresh the budget for the current fiscal year at the federal level. Finally, we've been working, and this has been it's taken some time. We're continuing to work on establishing a Chesapeake National Recreation area. We look forward to your input. We're trying to achieve this by consensus. I think we believe that designating the Chesapeake Bay National Recreation Area will bring more federal resources to Maryland over time, as well as more tourists who can help with our local economies in terms of their activities. So we think it will help us continue to obtain federal resources to protect the Bay, as well as more opportunities for businesses whose livelihood depends on the Bay. And we look forward to continue to work with you on that. As you know, we've had some issues identifying some of the anchor properties for that, but I do believe we need to make sure we have greater access to the Bay for more of our residents. So let me end there, Madam Chair. Look forward to any comments and questions. And again, it's been great to partner with you. We've tried to make sure the federal government is responsive to your needs, especially during these very difficult times.
Well, thank you very much. I will open up the floor to my colleagues if they have questions. And if not, I have questions too. All right, seeing no hands, I'm going to just jump right in. With respect to the transportation infrastructure legislation and funds that will be coming down to the state, are there specific projects that have been identified at this point, whether, you know, for Anne Arundel County, more regionally, or even, you know, across state borders that, you know, that we can be looking forward to?
So, you know, we reached out to the state because they establish the priorities. And as a result of receiving these additional funds and their expectation that they will receive these funds over the next 5 years. They're modifying their plan, right? They can now fund more priorities, and so that is a work in progress. I encourage all of you, to weigh in with the Maryland Department of Transportation, and make the point that now you've got a lot of additional funds. Here's our list of Anne Arundel County priorities that we think should now be eligible for funding, not just eligible for funding, but it should now receive funding.
Thank you. Ms. Fiedler.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Amanda Fiedler, District 5. Thank you, Senator Van Hollen, for being here today and touching on those important points. I wanted to circle back to the last point you noted, the National Park project, the legislation that you're working on. That's been a particular interest to my district. Obviously, it's targeted right in an area that has a considerable amount of traffic. And you mentioned driving tourists in large volumes from all areas. And I think, in a normal circumstance, that's a great idea. I do have concerns as the council representative for the area on what that does to our local residents along that corridor who, in the summer months, they're stuck for hours because of Bay Bridge traffic, and how you see that moving forward, balancing both the national park initiative with the current challenges of traffic due to the Bay Bridge.
Sure. Well, first of all, we look forward to working with you and any ideas you've got in terms of how we can address both concerns. As you know, there are a number of projects proposed for future Bay Bridges. I'm not intimately involved in that discussion. I'm sure all of you are following that closely. With respect to some of the specific properties that have been looked at, there are, we've had to sort of put on hold one of those properties. And there's an ongoing discussion. As you know, the county executives weighed in on that issue as well. But in terms of the overall concerns, we look forward to working with you to accommodate them. As I mentioned, the infrastructure modernization bill that was passed will create additional resources. I think that I don't expect, Maryland to all of a sudden be flooded with new people, but I do think over time, the designation of a national park recreation area will benefit the region. I don't know, one of the things people do when they're thinking of taking a trip is they go online and look at various national parks, and we're not there. So I do think that we can balance the interests of local residents with the benefits of providing a sustainable, rationale for more federal funding for protection over the long run, as well as the economic benefits. And my guess is a lot of Anne Arundel County small businesses would benefit.
Madam Chair, may I just make a follow-up?
That'd be fine. Go ahead.
Thank you. Thank you for that answer, Senator. I appreciate it. The Bay Bridge is a huge issue, and I know you're not intimately involved right now. If at any point in the future, I know we're waiting for the final results of NEPA Tier 1 study, but I'd be more than happy to sit down over a cup of coffee and share the views of the 5th District with you on that one.
Absolutely. I'm happy to do that.
Any additional questions from my colleagues? Well, it looks like we will be catching up with you in other forms. So thank you so much, Senator, for coming today and giving us an update and a brief on everything that's going on, and the different bills that have passed that will be sending dollars to our county and our state. And we really appreciate your hard work. And thanks again for giving us some of your time on this Tuesday morning.
It's great to be with you. I should say we are still working on parts of what you've has been called the Build Back Better agenda. I think you're probably familiar with some of those key elements that we're still working on, like trying to cut the cost of prescription drugs and childcare and some of the major climate investments. But stay tuned. We're still trying to get those over the finish line. Thank you for the opportunity to meet with all of you, and look forward to the continued partnership.
All right, thank you. Sounds good. Take care.
You too.
All right, so moving on to the legislation to be discussed this morning, it looks like the first bill on our agenda is Bill 8-22, which is our Green Infrastructure Master Plan, and this is from the County Executive. So, Mr. Barron, you have the floor.
Good morning, Madam Chair and members of the council. Excited to bring 822 before you. What 822 is the 2022 Green Infrastructure Master Plan. The plan sets up a framework for voluntary actions to conserve the largest connected natural areas in the county, as well as investing in green space in underserved communities. So let's be clear, this plan doesn't create new development requirements. This plan doesn't change zoning. This plan does refine and replace the Greenways Master Plan the council adopted in 2002. It sets a conservation goal so we can hold ourselves accountable and track progress. A goal to conserve 5,000 more acres of land by 2030. This would result in over 30% of the county's land area being conserved in the network by 2030. That's ambitious, but we've already achieved a great deal. We are at 29% of the county's land conserved in the network already. So I know there's been a lot of conversations with council members. We've done a number of briefings with many of you. As the plan was developed, it went to the Planning Advisory Board. And I think there's some talk of a couple of amendments, and I guess we'll discuss those at the appropriate time. But right now, I'm realizing I didn't introduce everybody here on the Zoom. So let me just say we have Ms. Pompa, Mr. Stringer, Mr. Kai Ziegler from OPZ, Ms. Matthews from Rec and Parks, and Ms. Kenny from Law, if the council has any questions. But I'm going to turn it over to Michael Stringer from OPZ to say a couple of words before we move to questions. Thanks.
Thank you very much. Again, Michael Stringer, Senior Planner with the Long Range Planning Group with the Office of Planning and Zoning. To add on to that comment about the 5,000 acre goal, I think it's important when we consider this plan to remember that this doesn't mean the county buying 5,000 more acres of land. Of course, my dog barks right now. Apologies. Just a moment. I'll try to muscle through here. Sorry. Approximately half the land that's already conserved in the network is actually privately owned. And this plan supports private conservation easements with partners like the Scenic River Land Trust, as well as other ways that private landowners can steward their properties. This plan is a result of a year-long effort last year, and actually this plan even began in 2017 with its initial analyses, which were then paused while the General Development Plan was developed. The plan builds on it and begins to implement Plan 2040, the General Development Plan as well. When we talked to the public during Plan 2040, we always heard a lot about conserving the natural environment. I think it's one of the top 3 issues. We always heard about environment, transportation, and education. So this plan comes forward to talk about how we conserve those natural areas in the county. It complements the efforts that we also have in land use plans around promoting redevelopment and revitalization in key areas like our town centers. And the council will hear more about that later in the year as the Odenton Town Center Master Plan and Pearl Town Center Master Plans move forward. The plan was developed through a deliberative process where we try to engage interested stakeholders in this issue. We met with a number of county boards and commissions earlier in the spring so we can get perspectives from Rec and Parks, the Ag Commission, the Environmental Commission as well. We also met with, we had public forums open to the public in April and September to try to get out into the community. In the summertime, when we could be outside, we went to some community festivals and farmers markets just to get the views of everyday folks in the community. We met with small groups who were very interested in this. We had workshops with nonprofits and state and federal partners in land conservation to ask them about what are the challenges and lessons learned about how we improve land conservation in the county. We also met with the development community, the representatives of the Maryland Building Industry Association, NIOP, the realtors, to understand how the development community would perceive a land conservation plan like this. And we made concerted efforts to reach out to underrepresented communities as well, working in partnership with the Communities of Hope organizations in Brooklyn Park, Parole, South County, and West County, to make sure we can understand the deficits, the inequalities that we have in the county around who has access to green space. So we developed this plan to try to bring a balanced approach to land conservation in the county that was ambitious but realistic. The plan's been out for public review over a couple different periods. The draft plan was made available in the summertime from August 12th through September 26th. We posted the plan online on our website. We also made an interactive web map available. The website was visited over 2,500 times, the web map over 3,500 times. We know that when we talk about land use, people get really concerned about what's shown on these maps of their properties. So we created that web map so people could actually go and click on specific properties and say, do you support this being in here? Do you want something removed? Do you wish that something else was added? So we got nearly 200 comments on that website with those type of issues of people saying, add this or take this out. And we analyzed each of those on a case-by-case basis. After we incorporated all that public comment we got, we put a revised plan out to the public planning advisory board. They reviewed it in November. That was also made available for the public to review then as well. We had oral testimony from 6 people and written testimony from 17. The PAB voted unanimously to support the plan moving forward to council. So with that brief introduction, I'm happy to take any questions that council has about the details of the plan and look forward to your discussion.
Do any of my colleagues have questions? Oh, Ms. Pickard.
Good morning. Thank you guys for being here. We spent some time together yesterday, Mr. Stringer and Ms. Pompa, and I wanted to take a minute to share the outcome of our conversation with my colleagues, if that's appropriate. Ms. Corby, we had an exchange about possibly sharing screen. So I wanted to add some language, clarifying language about the mapping that's engaged in the Green Infrastructure Plan, just so the public, the private sector, private landowners understand that the maps are conceptual. I would like Michael to finish that conversation. He spoke so articulately about it, and we just wanted, there's about 3 different places that I'm working on an amendment to add additional language regarding the maps and the mapping.
Thank you, Ms. Pickard. This is Mike Stringer from Office of Planning and Zoning. Yes, the map is a big key point of this plan. Gets a lot of focus, and we certainly put a lot of time and effort into it. So it's called the Green Infrastructure Network Map. And what it does is it uses a variety of data sets to try to identify and mark the boundaries of the largest natural areas in the county and connections between them. And we use basically the same approach as was done in the 2002 Greenways Plan. Just now we have much more up-to-date data. We have more sophisticated software to analyze it. The state and others have conducted more analyses of things like habitat value since the plan was developed, the Greenways Plan was developed in 2002. But one thing remains importantly consistent between the 02 plan and this one, which is that the map is conceptual. It is a county-wide map. We do have the ability now with our web mapping technology to be able to zoom in and look specifically at parcels. We did a lot of parcel-based research, but it's important to realize, that it's still a conceptual map. Those boundary lines would be refined when it came time to make any specific property land use decisions. So for example, when a property comes in for a development review process, there's a whole suite of studies that are done on the property that are site specific and on the ground for looking at forest and delineations, surveying in any wetlands or streams, things like that are also of concern for this green infrastructure plan. So those site-specific studies would be what's relied on when we make property-specific determinations in the development review process or other management decisions. Similarly, with recreation and parks, their decisions of how to manage a property is made based on site-specific studies. So we think there's 3 places where it'd be useful to add this into the plan to specifically call out that the map is conceptual. And the first one, if you can, that was A, is one of our text boxes, kind of a color page that's set aside that describes what the network is. I think it's important to clarify there that the map is conceptual. And then here, where the letter B is in our methods section. Again, it'd be an important clarifying mark there to say that as we're laying out the technical steps of how the map was put together, we put a statement in there saying that, again, the map is conceptual. And then a third place we think it'd be useful to put it in is in the actual recommendations, right? This is where people are going to look when they're implementing the plan. And we do have a recommendation that is Action 3.2 that speaks to how the Green Infrastructure Network is integrated into county planning programs and procedures. And we speak to how the plan is applied in development review, which is the same as with it as the 2002 Greenways Plan is applied, which is that it's noted and it is not regulatory. So what happens so we think it's important to include here this note again that the map would be conceptual, and as site studies are done specifically on a property, that those specific studies would be what's relied on to make decisions in development review, which is what the practice is today. We're just emphasizing and clarifying it for the purposes of the plan.
Madam Chair.
Go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Stringer. You did that much more articulately than I could. But so I think the amendment language is useful and needed as this document gets integrated into an additional planning document, or not planning document, but plan for conservation. I really want to applaud the staff for this plan. As you can see in the northern part of the district, if we'd had some planning document back in the 1940s or 50s, maybe we'd have a little more green space up in North and West County. I know we're making strides in conserving and purchasing land for parks up in North and West County, but it's pretty glaring. So I think this is an important tool going forward as we continue to develop and grow where we want to develop and grow. So thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Pickard. Mr. Volkey.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Nathan Volkey, District 3. I know that during the comment period, there were a number of landowners who reached out to planning and zoning and indicated they wanted to opt out of being part of the Green Infrastructure Network. Is there going to be an additional opt-out period? Is there any way that people who didn't realize before that their property may be included and now want to see that property moved out? Is there another chance to sort of come in and ask for changes other than we amend the map, right? Other than we have to come in specifically and say, do you take this parcel out, change that one, and amend the map specifically? So I'm just curious if that option exists.
I'll try to answer that question then. Christina or anyone else wants to respond also from OPZ. So again, Michael Stringer, Office of Planning and Zoning. To clarify, there were these 2 public review periods that allowed citizens, property owners to look at the map and provide us those kind of comments. That was back in the summer between August and September, and then when the Planning Advisory Board reviewed in November. We did review each of those on a case-by-case basis. There were about, I think, 52 or 53 of those. And actually, we were able to honor each of those. We responded back to each property owner personally to clarify to them first, make sure they understood that this plan is not regulatory. the inclusion of the property in the map simply reflects that there are natural resources in the property. Maybe there's trees or a stream or a meadow that's connected to other natural areas, and that it wouldn't affect the development potential of the property. But that as a voluntary plan, we were happy to work with them to honor their requests. And as we looked at each one on a case-by-case basis, they were always on the edge of the network. So we were able to remove them without impacting the integrity of the network. So they've had those two opportunities, and once the map is adopted by council, then this is the last step of our planning process. But as I said, if and when a property owner came forward for a development application, again, there'd be more site-specific studies that take precedence over their inclusion in this map or not.
Ms. Schuett, it looks like you wanted to chime in with something here.
Yes, thank you, Madam Chair. I was just wondering, based on your explanation, if someone comes in with a proposed development of any sort that fully complies with the law that's in the code, will this master plan in any way affect their ability to move forward under the code alone, even if it in some ways affects the master plan?
No, it would not. So again, the plan does not change the zoning, does not change the county development requirements that are in code. It's the same as it has been for the last 20 years, the 2002 Greenways plan. So projects have proceeded that have been in the Greenways that have been developed. And as you said, they are required to meet all of those code requirements. But the inclusion in the Greenway network does not add any additional requirements or regulations. I think the only place that it's mentioned in code is relative to a solar facility, where there's one specific mention in the code relative to including some preserving 200-foot corridor by the greenways if there's a solar facility in a certain circumstance.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Ms. Schuett. Ms. Fiedler.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Amanda Fiedler, District 5. I do appreciate the presentation, Mr. Stringer, and my dog was very concerned with your dogs barking. When we met, I had a question about the map as it pertains to future projects in the county, specifically the Broadneck Trail. On the map, that area is all green, and as we know, there will be some removal of trees in that area for the Broadneck Trail. Can you kind of go over your explanation to me on how that is included in the map in green? I don't think I could do it as well as you.
Sure. Thank you very much. Again, Michael Stringer, Office of Planning and Zoning. So this is a funny thing where this is actually consistent with as it already existed in the 2002 Greenways plan. That Greenways plan mentioned in text that it would include the regional plans, the regional trails in the county. So BNA, WBNA, Broadneck, South Shore trails. But they were not mapped. That may have been a limitation of the mapping technology at the time or the data the county had available. So now that we have that data, we have actually shown them on the map. We color code the map green because it's green infrastructure. So they do show up as green, even though we understand that, yes, those trails are paved and are going to be used for those multiple access. So it will not infringe on the ability to develop those trails, but it does just show them on the map because they're important connectors between these natural resource areas. And because in addition, while we always focus on the natural resource, and it's kind of the most prominent issue with green infrastructure, we also think about the multiple benefits of these, like recreation. So we included them because of that recreational benefit and the prominence they have in the county.
Thank you. Mr. Volkey.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Nathan Volkey, District 3. Mr. Stringer, thanks for your answers. So far, so good. Let me ask you this. How much privately owned land is being added to the green infrastructure network with this plan?
Can I ask a clarifying question, Mr. Volkey?
Sure.
Chair first.
That would be fine, Mr. Barron.
Are you asking in comparison to the 2002?
Yeah, that's
okay.
Exactly right. Sort of apples to apples comparison. If you overlay one over the other, how much private land is coming into the plan?
I would need a minute to check through my data tables. I think I have that number, but I would need to
get back to me. It's fine. Yep. Yeah. I just would like to know that answer. And
yeah,
Madam Chair, I don't know if anybody else has their hand up or not, but I have another question if possible.
You may go ahead.
Thank you. So I think I understand the answer to this question, but I want to ask to make sure I understand it. This is a voluntary process to be involved or not involved. This is non-regulatory in nature. So I'm trying to understand the purpose of the green infrastructure map. I believe that the purpose is sort of identifying land that the county may want to conserve or target for conservation, whether that's by purchase, easement, et cetera. That is the purpose, right? Because what I want to make sure that we're not getting into is this idea of we put all this land into a green infrastructure map, and now all of a sudden we come in with a new regulatory component as the next step of this that says, well, if your land is in the green infrastructure, now there's a second level of requirements. Sort of to Ms. Schuett's question, even if you're here and you're in this boundary area, if you meet all the other regular requirements of the code, there are no additional requirements at this time. My question kind of centers on, is there an intention for there to be more regulatory requirements, or is this truly just a target of land that the county wants to conserve, purchase, easements, et cetera? So it's more of a conceptual question of what's the point of what we're doing here and what's the next step?
Great. Thank you for the question.
Yeah, I'll let Michael say, but I think you would also have to ask for future councils. I mean, the intent of the administration is not to. And Michael, feel free to add.
And I appreciate that. Thank you.
Thank you. Michael Stringer, Office Planning and Zoning. Yes, I see two questions in there, and they are fundamental to the whole effort. What are we trying to do? And then how does this affect regulations? So the purpose of the plan, it is to focus efforts, right? We have limited public resources to invest in land conservation. We want to make sure that we are targeting those to the highest value lands from that perspective of those multiple benefits for the public, environmental, recreational, et cetera. So this helps identify on that map where to focus those efforts. It also gives a signal to our partners, nonprofit land trusts like Scenic River Land Trust or the Magathie River Land Trust, state and federal partners, where we want to see that investment so that we can align with those parties to make sure that we're collaborating and leveraging our investments. It also allows us to think at scale. This is one of the reasons why to do this at countywide versus just when a property gets considered individually. We tend not to think too much farther beyond its boundaries. But here, when you look at it countywide, you can see how one property sits, in a stream corridor is connected by some woods to something far away, and you can see how that works. That scale is really important to consider in this. It's also an important aspect of this is that it complements the Land Preservation Parks and Recreation Plan, which the Department of Recreation and Parks is developing and will come to council this spring. That plan has very detailed recreational needs assessment. And this gives a complement of talking about, right, what are the natural resource lands needs in the county? So I think those are kind of the key purpose of why we do this. Now, the regulatory piece, this is always a tension. This always comes up for debate when these projects come up. There will be environmental advocates who will say and who have said for years that, hey, this should be regulated. There will be those in the private development community and private property owner advocates who get scared to death that their property is shown on this map and that consideration of regulations looms. It is, as Mr. Barron said, it is not the intent of this plan to do that. There are no recommendations in the plan that point to that. In fact, we've made a point in clarifying and emphasizing the plan. I think it's in there at least 3, if not 4 times, that the plan is not regulatory. It does not change zoning or development regulations. We're going to put it in there multiple times so that people didn't miss that, and that was very clear. And I think one thing that's interesting to reflect on with this is that we've had a green ways plan in the county for 20 years. My understanding is that the same issue was debated then. And that, as it came up in the debates in 2019 on the Forest Conservation Ordinance, the debate is there, but also the county has set this precedent. The county councils have, for 20 years now, set this precedent that this is a voluntary land conservation effort. It complements our regulations. They exist. They apply throughout the county, whether you're in the network or not. But this is a way that we approach and focus our efforts on that voluntary land conservation.
Thanks very much.
Ms. Pickard.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Could we take a minute to talk a little bit of another part of the conversation that we had yesterday, just to share about the 30%, where we are, where we were in 2002, the conservation of about 5,000 acres over the last decade, and where we think we're going towards 2030. Michael, you also did a lovely job explaining that, breaking those calculations down.
Thank you, Ms. Pickard. Again, Michael Stringer, Office of Planning and Zoning. So as we developed this plan, we were trying to think of, what are ways that we can improve from the 2002 Greenways Plan? And one thing that we pushed ourselves to do is to have a measurable goal. And this is always a challenge, right? You stick your neck out. You can put this out there, and we can, if we don't reach it, we're going to look like we fell flat. So it's a risk in putting this out there, but we think it's important for accountability and just for tracking progress and making sure that we stay focused on this. Nothing that drives focus more than just a numeric goal with a date set to it. So we started to look at how could we set this goal in a way that'd be meaningful. So we looked both at past performance and looking forward to what we want to achieve. Since the adoption of the 2002 Greenways Plan, we've conserved about 5,000 acres of land per year, per decade. So 10,000 approximately total since 2002 within the network. So as we started looking ahead at a 10-year target, looking at that 5,000 acres seemed like a number that, well, we were able to do that in the past, but it's going to get challenging and has been getting challenging year over year. As land prices increase, as the county develops, there's fewer and fewer of these large properties to be able to acquire. There's only so many Bacon Ridge type properties that are out there. So we thought 5,000 was both aspirational yet attainable. And as we looked to where that would get us, we did our math and said, what is that as a percentage of the county, and realized, hey, that gets us to over 30% of the land base of the county being conserved in this network. And that coincides really nicely with an effort that's been developing based on conservation biologists' research and analysis, looking at biodiversity, the loss of species nationally and internationally. There's a collection of scientists who did some modeling globally, looking at how do we try to stem the loss of species. And they were looking at different scenarios for how much habitat had been lost and how much is remaining and what needs to be conserved. And they came across a couple threshold numbers of 30% and 50%. So there's actually kind of a movement that's being called the half Earth model for land conservation that's being promoted globally. And we're seeing it come home to roost as well. The Biden administration has put out an initiative using 30% of the land by 2030 as an interim step to try to get to 50% of the land by 2050 being conservation status. There's been advocacy around this, around the Chesapeake Bay region as well, from the Chesapeake Conservancy and others. So we looked back at the past performance of what we've been able to do. And remember, when we talk about conservation here, it's not just parks acquiring land. It looks at our agricultural easements. It looks at the efforts of our partners in land trusts. We're also counting up all those acres that we're conserving through the development process. When our subdivisions come in and we require them to set aside open space and recreation areas, when we require them to set aside floodplains or put forest conservation easements in, those add up to significant amounts of land. It's been interesting analyzing this network. You can see where we've conserved whole stream corridors through our subdivision review process. You can also see places where we've conserved fragments of little open spaces and developments that aren't connected to anything, and where I think they could have a lot more value if they were thought of in context and had more connectivity to open spaces around them. So we looked back at our performance and looked forward at where that would get us. And as Ms. Pickard mentioned and Mr. Barron did earlier, we're almost there. We're at over 29% of the land. When we kind of look at the acres of land in this network, there's about 107,000 acres. And about 73,000 of those acres are already conserved. And if we get up to that 5,000 acres more, that gets us to about 78,000 acres. You divide that by the total acres of land in the county, that gets us to 30%. So we're at about 29 now, and we're going to just, if we are successful in this, we notch that dial up to 30. Thank you.
Any additional questions or comments? Mr. Barron, you look like you're poised to say something.
No, I was just getting ready for the next bill, but I will say thank you to Michael and Christina, especially from OPZ, for all the work that's been put in on this, and more to come.
I will second that. Yeah, thank you very much. You've been very informative this morning. And seeing that there are no further questions, let's move on to bill number 9-22. This is another administration bill. Mr. Barron, you have the floor.
Yep, thank you, Madam Chair, Pete Barron with the administration. I have Lori Blair Klausmeyer from the Office of Law, and I may have Pete Hill, our Equity, Diversity, and Inclusion Director, joining us. Unfortunately, our team from personnel isn't available this morning. They are tied up. So if there are any questions, I'll make sure personnel gets them and gets them back to the council. But this is a bill previous. We discussed this, I think, at some point. The county exec issued an executive order last year, and in the introduction of the executive order, he pledged to introduce legislation to permanent that Juneteenth is a county holiday. As you all know, Juneteenth celebrates the end of slavery in the United States on June 19th, 1865. Major General Granger issued General Order 3 declaring all enslaved persons within Texas are free under the Emancipation Proclamation. So this holiday gives the county an opportunity to pause and reflect on our nation's history. We hope you will pass this bill at the next council meeting.
Thank you, Mr. Barron. Any questions from my colleagues? All right, seeing none, we will now move on to bill number 10-22. Mr. Barron, this is again an admin bill.
Yep, this 1022, I think I have Stephen Walker and Chris Daniels and Miss Anderson from Central Services and Miss Niederer. Well, there's Mr. Hill. Hope I did well. So for 1022, this bill approved the sale of 2 surplus properties to a private entity for a total of $25,000. The total acreage of both properties is 0.27 acres. The private buyer owns the property adjacent to these lots. Happy to answer any questions.
Again, seeing no questions from my colleagues, let's move on to bill number 11-22. Thank you for that information, Mr. Barron.
Happy to provide it. 1122 is a Board of Education supplementary appropriation bill. I have, I believe, Mr. Shaknovich and Mr. Stansky from the Board of Ed, Mr. Taru from our budget office, Blair Klossmeyer from the Office of Law. 1122 makes appropriations to the Board of Ed from the unanticipated grant revenue totaling $63 million, the vast majority of which, nearly $62 million, is coming from federal grants. The remaining is coming from state grants. If you need more information, you can go to the fiscal note, which provides a breakdown of where that money is going, and our experts here if you have any questions. This is no additional cost to county taxpayers.
Any questions from my colleagues? Mr. Volkey.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Nathan Volkey, District 3. So I am looking at the fiscal note. I just want to clarify, these funds are these are ARP funds, right? Federal government funds that are coming down through the American Recovery Plan.
Mr. Taru, Mr. Shaknovich.
So certainly, it's Alec Shaknovich, Chief Operating Officer for the school district. So Mr. Volkey, about 5 million of them are federal ARP dollars. The fiscal note has those as an ARP homeless support grant and an ARP special education support grant. The remaining balance of the $61.8 million is also federal money, but it's coming under a different federal program called ESSER that's funneled through the Department of Education as opposed to directly from the Treasury Department. So it's just got a different moniker on it, ESSER. And So two of the fiscal note shows that two of the state programs are federal money called ARP, to your point. The remaining four are, yes, also federal money, but called ESSER.
Okay. Madam Chair, can I just follow up briefly?
Go ahead.
Thank you. So yeah, Mr. Sheknovich, I'm looking at the Office of Elementary and Secondary Education's website on the Department of Ed's website, looking at the ESSER funds. That's why I asked the question, because I wanted to make sure I understood that. But it looks like the funding mechanism was through the ARP and also the Coronavirus Response and Relief Supplemental Appropriations Act of 2021 for the ESSER 2 funds. It went to the Department of Education, but I think it all falls under the ARP and the COVID money. Is that your understanding too?
100% correct. It was just who was charged with sort of administering or sponsoring the money change, but the basic source is absolutely in line with what you just stated.
Okay, thank you.
Ms. Fiedler.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Amanda Fiedler, District 5. Mr. Sheknovich, I appreciate you going over this legislation and answering questions. We've discussed at length how the federal money coming to the county is used. And I know you and I had a conversation a month or so ago about the process in which the board has to obtain the ESSER money. Can you run through that? It was very helpful for me to understand.
Yes, ma'am. Again, for the record, Alex Sheknovich, Chief Operating Officer. So the monies, as I alluded to with Mr. Volke, the monies coming from the federal government to the State Department of Education basically was nominated to be the sponsor and the intermediary for the ESSER dollars. For each one of the ESSER funding packages, or for each package that the State Department of Education was responsible for, they put out a grant application, which is basically a governance document that outlines the terms and conditions, what is a permissible expense, what can be included, what can be excluded, et cetera. Again, I call it term and conditions. So they put out a term and condition document as well as an apportionment of how much each of the 24 local education agencies are eligible for. Each one of the 24 LEAs then have to put together a grant application package that declares what its local intention is for the dollars. It's a very detailed application package that identifies to which activities the funds are assigned to, what's the determination in terms of, what the outcome is going to be. That package then gets sent to the State Department of Education. The State Department of Education examines each and every one of those grant applications packages to make sure that it fully comports not just with the Federal Department of Education's guidelines and the State Department of Education guidelines, but that they also comport with the Treasury's guidelines, because again, ultimately the monies are originating there. So the state is doing their diligence, looking for compliance. If they concur that the grant package is fully complied with, they then will issue an award letter for that. And again, the award letter not just comports with the amounts, but with the different activities. We then can, with that, we seek appropriation authority and we can begin moving out on discharging the grant, Councilwoman Fiedler. And then we are required to do reporting back. So we have to report back to the State Department on prescriptive reports that show progress in terms of the spending and activities. And that's how they monitor those grants while we're midstream. And ultimately, at the end, when that grant gets closed out and we identify that it is in fact closed out, we do not anticipate any more spending, et cetera, then the State Department will audit each one of those grants to make sure that in the end, from stem to stern, we fully complied with the state and federal expectations on the grant administration.
Thank you. I appreciate that.
Yes, ma'am.
Thank you. Mr. Volke.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Nathan Volke, District 3. Mr. Sheknovich, thanks for the information. So I'm looking at the fiscal note, well, the bill or the fiscal note. I guess we can go to either one, but page 2 of both of them lays out, I guess, what the expectation is from the board on how to spend the money that you are appropriating. I heard you talk about the grant application. I looked in the materials that we have so far. I don't see that we have the grant application. So I would just ask if you could, is it possible, does Madam Auditor maybe have that? I'm assuming you've shared that with us already. I think that's your typical process. So, yeah.
Yes, sir. Again, Alex Shackno, Chief Operating Officer. We provided both the budget office, the county finance office, and the auditor's office with backup information to support the bill request.
Okay. Yeah, I don't see it yet. But so that leads to my question. If you can run through those 12 categories a little bit and tell me what it is that you're expecting to do with the funds, that would be helpful. And
okay. So I will start, and you tell me if I'm going long or not, because this could be a couple-hour discussion.
Oh goodness! Well, keep it high level, otherwise people will be upset with me.
Yeah. Oh, that's what I was trying to go for.
Yeah.
Again, sorry, Alex Jacknovis, Chief Operating Officer. So I'll give you a flavor, Mr. Volke, and I'll try to tie it to that sheet you're looking at. So you'll see before you, for example, in administration, there's a $2.3 million charge. Okay. So I'll give you a smattering of what's included in that. Basically, in that category are contracted services for IT security, for cloud storage for our enterprise software systems. There's an E-rate consultant that we were obligated to hire for the Federal Emergency Connectivity Fund for Chromebooks and internet. We also have in that category fingerprinting. We have to do fingerprints and background checks on things like our midday monitors, our tutors and volunteers. So instead of asking them to pay out of their pocket up front for those, we put that into the grant. Also, because of the large amount of data storage, I alluded to the cloud storage quantity, but we also had to upgrade our on-site servers and data storage equipment to be able to house the amount of data. Again, if you can imagine going from a paper-based organization to electronic, we have to store everything and we have to retain it for years and years. So we had a massively upper game, both in terms of on-premises storage and cloud storage. So that gives you a flavor for that category. The next category, mid-level administration, is about $640,000. For that, we stood up a virtual school. So the administration of that virtual school was put into that category, as well as a secretary to support our homeless population. Some training and professional development was in that category, as well as the supplies and the devices for both the virtual school as well as for administrative staff at our charter and contract schools. For our instructional salary category, that's the largest one, I believe, $21.7 million. That was for tutoring services for our McKinney-Vento students, which are almost eligible students, as well as 6 academic support tutors for that. We also put into that category tutoring for general education students. Stipends, this is stipends for staff to do outside of school tutoring or homework supports after hours on nights and weekends. We also put in there stipends to do our summer schools. So previously, unless you were a special education student or an income eligible student, we charged tuition for summer schools. For the remaining portion of the students, we elected to forego charging tuition to summer school students, and we used the grant to backfill the revenue or to match the expenditures required to run a summer school. So a lot of the instructional salaries for running the summer school, again, were applied to this grant. Similarly, the salaries for the instructors that run our virtual school were charged to the grant, as well as stipends for our Twilight school faculty, long-term substitutes, because again, with the COVID absences and other staffing challenges, we put long-term substitutes and additional temporaries and TAs into the school. So a lot of that salary went for those faculty members. Our charter schools were also eligible for this. So the funds that go to our 2 charter and the faculty members of our 2 charter and 2 contract schools also are in that instructional category. We also provided behavioral assistance to some of our schools that were experiencing higher incident rates of behavioral challenges. And finally, there was an expansion of pre-kindergarten. So salaries for the teachers and teaching assistants, to support the kindergarten population was charged through that instructional grant. Going down to the next category, about $8.5 million for textbook and instructional supplies. That's where instructional materials for homeless students was an eligible charge. That is where we funded the licensing for our Google Classrooms, or our online digital platform to communicate back and forth with students, as well as software for both career and technology students. For example, at our 2 CAT centers, when we were not able to support in-person instruction at the CAT centers, we acquired software to support that. That is also where laptops and Chromebooks leases were charged, and programmatic material of instruction and software licenses. We were required to have a digital assessment tool. It's called iReady. It was one of the state vetted software packages that we were mandated to use to gauge students' posture in terms of where they are in the learning continuum and identify sort of recovery services. So the licensing and subscription fees for the iReady were charged to that, as well as, again, our charter and contract schools, as always, are eligible for that. Also, the materials of instruction for the virtual school students were charged to that textbook and instructional supply category. Naviance, which is a software tool that's used for career and college counseling, career and college applications. If any members have students that are juniors or seniors, you know what Naviance is, because it's really the intermediary between our institutions and higher ed, again, because not only on our front, in-person guidance and career counseling was curtailed, but on the other end, colleges were not doing in-person, interviews, visits, et cetera. So the Naviance computer program really created that bridge. Also, laptops for our Unit 4 or SAAC members that needed connectivity to students, and these are typically, again, teaching assistants or special education assistants that needed laptops. They never had them before, but they're doing direct student support. We had to acquire cameras to put on desktops to allow instruction in the virtual environment, so they were purchased out of that category. Our charter and contract schools had materials of instruction that they used for tutoring and after-school activities that were eligible, and again, those were passed through. We used instruction for some community events, particularly in our concentration of poverty schools, to continue connections with our families outside of daycare, as well as student attendance incentives in that category. And finally, materials of instruction for expanded pre-K offerings were in that. Mr. Volke, I don't know what the pace of this is, so I'm through 3 of them, and I can keep going. I've got about 9 more to go.
Go ahead, Madam Chair.
Could I step in for a moment? Our auditor, I think, just shared a document that very well aligns with what you've shared so far. And so if it's okay with the original question, or with my colleague, Councilman Volke, I think we have this in a document form now. that we could relieve you of going through line by line something that we now have, because it looks like we've got the same thing that you're looking at. Would that be okay, Mr. Volkey?
I fully concur with the chair.
Okay. And I also want to just thank you, Mr. Volkey, for asking the question before I had a chance to. It's always helpful to have, this level of detail. When we're dealing with such large funds, even when they're coming from the federal government, it's still helpful to just see that, that breakdown and see how everything is being used. So I appreciate Mr. Saknovich going over that level of detail, and I appreciate our auditor sharing this document that I think can give us that in print. All right. So now that I've shortened that little piece, which again, we'd really do appreciate you going over that detail. Are there any questions before we continue here? All right. Well, seeing none, I think that probably answered our biggest question. So thanks again. And at this time, we can move on to, let's see, where are we? 12-22. And again, this is an administration bill. Mr. Barron, you have the floor.
Thanks, Madam Chair. I'm looking forward to you all passing the test on the last bill now. The 1222, I'm keeping the same team and adding Ms. McAllister from budget. This deals with Board of Education capital supplementary appropriations for security-related upgrades and maintenance backlogs. It amends the FY22 capital program. The appropriations come from state IAC grants totaling just over $1 million. Happy to answer and go into the same level of detail if needed.
Ms. Fiedler.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Amanda Fiedler, District 5. Mr. Barron, I appreciate that offering. I just want to clarify the security upgrades, things like the double entry ways to the schools and locking mechanisms on doors and things like that.
Mr. Shagnovich is shaking his head. Yes, I believe it's correct.
Yes, ma'am. Again, Alex Shagnovich, Chief Operating Officer. So, Ms. Fiedler, this is grant funding that would support, in part, the construction of those double entry security vestibules at 7 different schools. So we made application for the grant. They had enough money to help us along our continuum. So this would go to 7 schools: Brooklyn Park Elementary, Davidsonville Elementary, Glendale Elementary, Hilltop Elementary, Jacobsville Elementary, Marley Glen Special, and Ruth Parker Easton Special Center.
Madam Chair, may I ask a follow-up?
Go ahead.
At the completion of these projects, would we have a double entry in all schools countywide, or are we still going to be chipping away at that?
Alex Shagnovich, Chief Operating Officer. We're still going to be chipping away at it, fumbling for my piece of paper here. So we have already, so we've got 81 that are fully completed, Ms. Fiedler. We have 26, this 7 are part of the 26 that are actively in the design, permitting, construction, or closeout phase. As we sit here today, we still, so that gets us to about 107 of our roughly 125 schools. So we've got about 23 left. But as part of our capital budget request for FY23, we are going to be once again asking for county funding, Madam Councilwoman, and we're hoping the state has had this grant opportunity out there for the past couple of years. We've applied every year and gotten funding. So we hope that when a grant window opens up in FY23, we can once again aggressively pursue supplemental state money to match up with any additional. We very much want to complete these as fast as possible, and only because you asked for the lock question. That project is 100% completed. We are 100% done with all the interior and exterior locks. So we only have these double entry security vestibules left in that project.
Great, thank you so much.
Yes, ma'am.
And I will just chime in, in my day job as a teacher, my colleagues and I greatly appreciate the lock upgrades, the thought of having to walk out into the hallway to lock your door if they're an active threat in the building is a little unnerving. So now we can just push the little button on our door handles, and that's fantastic. So thank you for completing that. And I'm sure parents feel that as well. Any additional questions here? All right, looks like none. So we will be moving on to bill number 13-22. And we are moving on to bill from Councilman Pruski. So Mr. Pruski, you have the floor.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Good morning, everyone. I wanted to first explain the genesis of this bill. Had conversations with the Economic Development Corporation and others in our area, and Frederick County, Montgomery County, Howard County, I could go down the list, I'll stop, all have some form of property tax credit for data centers. And why is our area unique? It was mentioned earlier by Senator Van Hollen, and of course, many of you follow in my district, along with Ms. Lacey, we have Fort Meade. And certainly the need for data centers is continuing to grow exponentially, and additional businesses are trying to locate in our area. We are at a disadvantage though in Anne Arundel because they are looking at other areas and businesses because of those tax credits, and we don't have any. So certainly I'd like to bring this bill forward. Look forward to your support. There are some qualifying pieces that require an application. Anne Arundel Economic Development will be handling the application, monitoring, and other pieces. And you'd ask, well, have they done it before? Do they do anything else? Well, we actually have the foreign trade zone property tax credit. Also, Maryland itself has enterprise zone tax credits. These things go on all the time. It's nothing new. And again, the bill itself does have some thresholds that have to be met. And why is it unique to give a tax credit to a data center versus somebody else? I don't know if any of you visited data center. I've been actually to 2 or 3. And they are very large facilities with very few people. It's essentially a very mechanical operation. I use that in the technology terms, with very few employees, and the impact upon our communities is really not a lot. Obviously, you have electricity for servers, minimal pieces, but in terms of having a large manufacturing facility versus a data center, again, is different. And $10 million worth of investment brings a lot more in terms of the value in our community, along with the 10 employees that are required in the bill. I do want to, if it's okay, Madam Chair, to let economic development also further the cause for this case. I'm sure they will do that. And again, I'll end there, and thank you for your consideration.
That would be fine.
But maybe I'll kick with a quick thank you to the councilman for working with economic development and the administration in crafting this bill. From EDC, we have our director, Ben Burge, Wes McWillem, and Sarah Horta. From finance, you have Karen McQuaid, Billy Penley, and law, Lori Blair, Klaus Meyer, if there are any questions. And now I'll turn it over to Ben if he has any comments.
Thanks, Pete. I appreciate it. Good morning, everybody. Ben Burge with the Anne Arundel Economic Development Corporation. Pete introduced the team. We also have with us to answer questions if needed, Mr. Joe Stacknick with Ryan, who's an expert on site selection for these types of facilities. I won't repeat the specifics of Councilmember Pruski, who we thank for bringing this legislation forward. Some of the background: 2 years ago, the General Assembly passed legislation which the governor signed, a bipartisan effort to allow local governments to provide discounted personal property taxes for qualified data centers. It also provides relief for some sales taxes on capital equipment, state sales tax for capital equipment for data centers. So the idea was to get Maryland into the data center game, which has been completely dominated by Northern Virginia. In fact, Northern Virginia, their data center market is about 3 times larger than the next 4 data center markets combined. They're absolutely overwhelming the market, but they're starting to run out of space. They're starting to run out of water and energy and all these things that make data centers grow. One of the reasons why Maryland is so primed to take off in this area, of course, is because of Fort Meade and the federal funding and the commercial opportunities that are related. When the legislation was passed 2 years ago, Howard County immediately passed legislation to give tax credits to data centers. Prince George's County followed 2 months later. They got right out of the gate. Councilmember Pruski brought up a couple of other competing counties. I will point out that a couple of those competitors, which would be Frederick and Kent, currently don't have any personal property taxes. So they don't have to pass legislation to be competitive in this area. So we're trying to keep up with our neighbors in this aspect, trying to level the playing field so that we can bring these businesses, these data centers to Anne Arundel County. As Mr. Pruski said, they don't bring a lot of employees, but they do bring a lot of spin-off activity. There will be a lot of commercial development, a lot of commercial activity around these data centers if they're located here. And that will provide an exponential bonus to the county in terms of business development in this area. So anyway, that's the high level view. We hope that you would be supportive of this. And we would be happy to answer any questions either by me, unless they're tough questions, I'll kick it over to my team, and anything that is industry specific, I'm hoping Mr. Stacknick could fill in also.
Ms. Pickard.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you to the esteemed panel for being here today. For the folks watching at home and maybe some of us on this call, can we just have a quick distinction between personal property taxes and property taxes? And then
sure.
I did just want to make one comment because I don't need to come back, but you know, the footprint of data centers is, as I've been briefed and learned, while they're not large employers, the employees that do come with data centers are solid, family sustaining, higher wage jobs. Is that correct?
Again, Ben Burge with the Economic Development Corporation. Absolutely, Councilmember Pickard. These are good paying jobs. There aren't a ton of them, but they also bring good paying jobs that are contractors. There are 10 or 12 different contracted out services around cleaning and maintenance and security, maintaining those gigantic air filtration and air cooling systems that they have. Those aren't full-time on-site employees, but our services contracted out. So they're absolutely good paying jobs. Many of them, of course, would be in the county. We can't guarantee all of them would be, sadly. But to get back to your original question, unfortunately, Ms. McQuaid is here to correct me if I mess this up, but to keep it really simple, because of the context you provided, personal property taxes are the things you own inside the building, and real property taxes is the land and the structure. So Ms. McQuaid is not, oh, darn it, I thought I was going to get away with that one.
Karen McQuaid, Office of Finance. Yes, that's correct. And if you look at the definitions, it actually gives you the definitions of qualified data center personal property in the Tax General Code 11239. So it goes into a lot of detail of what is included in that personal property. But that was a good definition, Ben. Thank you.
Thank you.
I'd like to jump in with a question. So you mentioned that one of the benefits of having the data centers set up shop in the county is that they bring other businesses. And so I'm just curious, are they, is there anything unique businesses that they would, sort of invite along with them? Or are these sort of the typical businesses that you'd see around any new commercial activity? So if you could elaborate on that, that'd be very helpful.
Yes, again, Ben Burge with the Economic Development Corporation. Before I kick it over to Sarah Horta, I am going to quote her. She always tells me, businesses like to be near their data. So I'm going to tee that up for Ms. Horta to answer that question in much more depth than I ever could.
Thanks, Ben. My name is Sarah Horta. I'm with Arundel Economic Development Corporation. Just as a bit of background, I have my master's in cybersecurity and I am certified forensic examiner. My role within EDC is the attraction and growth of technology and cybersecurity companies within the county. And, like you said, this would attract more technology companies, I believe, to the county. A data center itself, is a physical facility that houses an organization's data and applications. Some of the physical kind of elements of that are, servers and firewalls, switches, and routers. And it allows for companies to have a redundant source of data. So if one site goes down because of a physical altercation or whatever like that, their business can keep going, higher fault tolerance. And so there's not a single point of failure. Companies now, we've heard, I think from the county public school system earlier, that they have more data storage issues, that they're since turning everything from paper to online. So it allows for higher security for the flow of data. And not just contractors are using this, it's healthcare, it's banking, it's health IT. So there are more companies that are using this type of facility for security purposes and availability purposes than government contracting, which of course, when we have the second largest Army installation in the US, that alone kind of serves its purpose for that.
Thank you very much. That is exactly what I was looking to learn. So I appreciate that.
You're welcome.
Any other questions from my colleagues? All right, well, seeing none, thank you very much. And to Mr. Burge and Ms. Horta, and I'm sorry if I left anyone out. And thank you, Mr. Pruski, for this bill. It looks like next up we have bill number 14-22, and this is Mr. Volke's bill. Mr. Volke, you have the floor.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Appreciate that. So this bill, can everybody hear me? I see Mr. Burge is still on the screen.
We'll get rid of them.
Oh, there you go. Okay. All right. Yeah. So this bill basically comes back and simply amends the penalty or the fine for a bill that we passed previously. We passed Bill 108-22, and that said that if a seller of firearms failed to distribute literature that was created, printed, and provided to them by the Department of Health, that at that point they could face a fine. And there was a certain categorization of what the fine was under Bill 108-22. This bill would simply change that from a Class C to a Class E offense. That's the purpose of the bill, is I think to put a more reasonable fine in. I did not get the sense on the bill that was in front of us when we had 108-22 that bill was going to be amended to change this from a Class C to a Class E fine. So for that reason, I came in with a standalone piece of legislation to address that issue. I just think that a Class C fine is frankly too high of a fine for what it is that we're asking business owners to do. And I think a Class E civil offense fine is significant enough that it will ensure compliance. Thank you.
Mr. Barron, did you want to respond?
Administration is happy to respond. I have Lori Blair-Klausmeyer here from the Office of Law. If you recall the bill, and sorry if I missed it, Mr. Volke, if you referenced it, comes from 108-21, which was developed by Councilman Pruski and other members of the council. At that time, the administration was comfortable with the level of the class for the civil offense. See no reason to change, but it is a policy decision for this council as to where to set it. We are perfectly comfortable where it is, and would be fine if the council defeated this bill.
I just wanted to chime in that actually, I was the lead sponsor on 108-21 and
I always got them confused.
It's
Apologies,
okay. It's
Madam
okay.
Chair.
I just feel like, we have to make sure the record is clear. And obviously, Mr. Pruski, offered support and was, working on and aware and working on this bill as well. But, we got to stand up for ourselves. So anyway,
For sure.
there really was thought and put into the level of the offense. And, I think in my humble opinion, obviously this is something that is a policy debate question. I felt like the level C, the class C was really going to be a little bit more, just a little more incentive than a class E civil offense in terms of ensuring compliance. So I just wanted to, since this was a decision that I originally made, I thought it was fair for me to chime in. Are there any other questions or comments from my colleagues?
Just another apology. Sorry, Madam Chair.
No worries at all. What was the number? 108. So that means it was out of 108 bills. No one can keep track of that many. But seeing no other questions or comments from my colleagues, we will move on to bill number 16-22. And this is a county executive bill. And Mr. Barron, you have the floor.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So 1622 is an incredibly important piece of legislation. We've talked with all of you, members of the public, and now we have 1622 before us. I have a large group of folks joining me to help answer questions and provide perspective. Our police chief, Chief Alwood, and her chief of staff, Mr. Morris, as well as a number of their command team. We have Mr. Hill, our Equity, Diversity, and Inclusion Director, Ms. Smith, our Human Relations Officer from the City of Annapolis. I believe we have Carrie Berger and Rhonda McCoy joining us. And from the Office of Law, we have Lori Blair Klausmeyer and Ethan Hunt. So I have a PowerPoint that I'm going to run through very quickly for the council. I'll make sure that this is available to Ms. Corby digitally so you can get a copy of it and post it online. After I run through the PowerPoint, I'll turn it over to our chief for a couple of quick remarks and then move on to any questions that members of this council might have. So Ms. Corby, if you don't mind, I'm going to share my screen here. Can everybody see this? Okay. So we're here to talk about the Police Accountability Board implementation. In the 2021 General Assembly session, the legislature passed a number of bills relating to police reform. A bill requiring body-worn cameras and other rules around the use of force, reforms around no-knock warrants and the Public Information Act, reforms restricting surplus military purchases, and a new independent investigation process for alleged or potential police-involved deaths of civilians. And then the bill that we're going to talk the most about with 1622 is HB 670. HB 670 did a lot of changes, but what's most important as it relates to the discussion today and moving forward for what the county has to do is it changes the process for police discipline. It mandates counties create a police accountability board and sets rules for how discipline moves through a process. I'm going to go to the next slide. Each county will have one police accountability board. It has a number of responsibilities under state law, and it's responsible for working with all law enforcement agencies within the county. So here in Anne Arundel, we have our county police, City of Annapolis, our sheriff, our community college, and our Crofton law enforcement agencies. This has been, the legislature passed 670. It goes, parts of it went into effect already, but the police accountability portion goes into effect starting July 1st of this year. So this slide tells us a little bit about what the county's been doing to prepare for the new state mandate. You know, we worked internally to develop what we thought, understand the bill, develop the outreach plan. This council had the Maryland Association of Counties brief you at the work session a month ago. The administration has hosted a number of community outreach meetings. We've met with a number of stakeholder groups. We've noted concerns, collected feedback, and I can tell you we've heard a lot about the right way to approach this. The proposal before you is 1622. We will now move through the legislative process. So the one in blue here is sort of the you are here. We intend to start to advertise to seat the board, and I'll get to that more in a minute. And then we have to implement it. We have to hire and train staff. We have to develop the necessary processes and forms, public portals, and all be ready by July 1st, 2022. You can go to the next slide here. Just to remind everybody about what we're talking about here, this is a state mandated structure for adjudicating complaints of police misconduct. The old system was known as the Law Enforcement Officers Bill of Rights. Effective July 1st, 2022, the Law Enforcement Officers Bill of Rights has been repealed by the state and replaced with this structure, which we have to put into place. So it's an incredibly complicated process. I'm a visual guy. We made a flow chart. I'll show this flow chart again at the later in the PowerPoint, but just to walk the council through how the state structured a complaint of police misconduct and how it will need to move through the process. A complaint can come into the Police Accountability Board or to the law enforcement agency. They receive the complaint. If it comes to the Accountability Board, they have to forward that to the law enforcement agency within 3 days. So if the complaint deals with the Anne Arundel County Police, the Police Accountability Board would need to forward that complaint to the Anne Arundel County Police within 3 days. If it went to the Annapolis Police Department, it would have to go to the Annapolis Police Department. So the LEA, the law enforcement agency, whose officer is subject to the complaint, conducts the investigation. After the investigation is completed, it forwards the entire investigatory file to the Administrative Charging Committee. We'll talk more about Administrative Charging Committees in a minute. The Administrative Charging Committee reviews the file and makes a determination whether to charge or not charge. If the officer is not charged, they have to issue a written opinion explaining why the allegations are unfounded or the officer is exonerated. If the officer is charged, they have to issue a written report and forward to the chief a recommendation for discipline under a state-created discipline matrix. So there's a matrix that is being developed by the Maryland Police Training and Standards Commission that will set what discipline needs to be imposed. The chief has the option of imposing more significant discipline or the discipline recommended under the matrix, the chief cannot recommend a lower level of discipline. This is the state law, and we'll come back and talk more. Discipline is imposed if the officer accepts it, the matter is final. If the officer appeals, it can go to a trial board. We'll talk more about trial boards and how they're constituted. The trial board has a hearing and a decision. And then if the officer doesn't appeal that decision within 30 days, it's final. If the officer appeals within 30 days, it can move up into the court system, up into circuit court. So that's a lot of how the state has changed how the discipline process flows. As a county, it's our responsibility to put this into place here locally. So I'm going to keep moving and we'll get into some detail. It's why you have Bill 1622 before you now. Our hearing is on 3/7. So let me go through a little bit about what the state law requires and some of the policy choices that the county has made as it relates to the state law. State law requires our police accountability board to hold meetings, to make certain appointments to the administrative charging committee and the trial board, excuse me. But we'll talk more a little bit about that in later slides. It must receive complaints and it must do outcomes and review and reporting analysis and submit reports to the governing body, that's the executive and the council. I'm going to keep moving. So the first decision that the county has as we implement the state law is what should the membership look like? State law has a couple of requirements for membership. It prohibits an active duty police officer from being a member of the accountability board. It requires a reflection of the racial, gender, and diversity and cultural diversity of the county. Where the county has some policy choice is the number of members that we put on the board. The proposal in front of you has 9 voting members. One of the members is the chair. One of the 9 members must be an Annapolis resident who is appointed upon recommendation of the mayor and city council of Annapolis. All members have a residency requirement. We set an appointment process that they are appointed by the county executive and confirmed by this council. We put in language requiring public notice of an open seat on the board so the public knows about it. We subject members to a background check, or potential members to a background check before they're able to serve. The chair, and we'll get to this a little further down, has a number of powers under state law. And so we felt it was important to include language that the chair is also confirmed by the council. They serve for 3 years. We stagger the term so the entire board doesn't turn over in 1 year. And then we put term limits on the process. Before I jump from this slide, actually, one other point here is the resolution for appointment will require a public hearing. Unlike other board appointments in the council, it does not, you can suspend the rules and have a meeting. It's our intent that the proposal include language, or it does include language, excuse me, that the the appointment would have to come back at the next meeting, so there would be an additional level of public notice of who is being appointed to these boards, to this board. We include ex-officio membership for the board. This includes, so an ex-officio is a non-voting member that would bring expertise or experience that would be incredibly valuable to the board. Our equity, diversity, and inclusion director, our human relations officer, our police chief, who would be able to designate somebody, our sheriff would be able to designate somebody, and the city of Annapolis police chief would be able to designate somebody to sit as ex officio. If there's a vacancy on a board, they are filled in the same manner, so it would have to go through council approval. We do allow a member to be removed, but only removed for cause, and there's some language in the bill as it relates to cause. One of the things that we wanted to do was make sure that this board is balanced, comes from a diversity of experience and expertise. So we have a list in the bill of to the ability, the best of our ability, and it's something for the council and the county executive to look at as we are naming people to serve on this board, that we try to include people who have a wide variety of educational or professional experience or perspective that they can bring to the board. One thing, as you know, we can't appropriate in a policy bill, but we do have language as it relates to requiring a budget, allowing for contractual services, and added an additional position to our initial proposal. So the bill before you actually has an executive director position and an administrative secretary. Because the way our county code works, we need to bring a position control bill. So before you introduce at the 22nd, we will be bringing a bill that creates the executive director position. It is the administration's intent that that bill stay one step behind this bill. So as the council is acting, we would, if somehow that the position control bill catches up to this bill, we would ask to hold it until 1622 passes. We require financial disclosure and conflict of interest forms, and we require record keeping procedures. This is an important slide. There's some language in the bill. It was our understanding that the board would be subject to the State Open Meetings Act, but we wanted to make it clear that the board has to be open to the public. So it must comply with the State Open Meetings Act. And we have language in 1622 that requires the Police Accountability Board to conduct open meetings. So I mentioned the Administrative Charging Committee and the trial boards. This is probably the most impactful part of 670 as it relates to our officers and the public. There is a new procedure for discipline that and adjudication of allegations of police misconduct that comes through 670, and 670 prescribes certain structures and powers. There's one charging committee per county. It has 5 members. The chair of the PAB or another member of the board is appointed by the chair. 2 civilians who are appointed by the PAB, and 2 civilians who are appointed by the county executive of the jurisdiction. The Administrative Charging Committee has a long list of powers under 670. They review the findings of a law enforcement agency. They may request additional information. They review body camera footage. They may call an officer before them. That officer is entitled to a representative with them. They also can issue subpoenas. I know that's been a question. They make a determination whether to charge or not charge the officer subject to the complaint. And as I mentioned, they must issue written reports regardless of the determination. Trial boards, you would have multiple in a county and they are convened as necessary. State law is there are 3 members, a judge, a civilian, and an officer appointed by the chief law enforcement agency, the chief of the law enforcement agency that employs the officer. The judge must be a retired or active administrative law judge or a retired district or circuit court judge. That appointment comes from the county executive. The PAB appoints the civilian, and then obviously the chief of the law enforcement agency makes their own appointment. Then the law enforcement agency shall establish a trial board process in accordance with the state code. And keep going here. The membership, we talked a little bit about that on the last slide, and then certain requirements. I will note that the bill that we have before you for 1622 talks about training requirements for members of the accountability board, but the bodies, the Administrative Charging Committee and the trial boards will also be subject to training and standards. And we expect that to come, well, we know that will come. The HB 670 requires that the Maryland Police Training and Standards Commission promulgate regulations as it relates to training. I keep going back here. Now that we've gone through all of this, hopefully this flow chart makes more sense to you. I had to read these bills 100 times before I could actually get my head around how the process will work. We have extremely limited authority under 670, under state code, to adjust how this process works. And I'm gonna show you where we are on the timeline, just to remind everybody of the seriousness and the short timeline of what we have. We introduced the bill. We have public hearings. I'm sure there will be amendment discussions, all of that need to move forward. We need to submit names for council approval. Part of that timeline is dependent on the number of people we get to apply and how fast we are able to bring them before the council. We need to make sure we have time to train, hire staff, and develop the internal processes to do this right. And then starting July 1st, the state mandate process goes into effect. So I'm going to stop my share. I hope that helps members of the council understand a little bit about the state mandate and the state requirements. I'm going to ask our chief to make a couple of comments right now, and then happy to move as the council sees fit in terms of questions.
Thank you, Mr. Barron. Can everyone hear me? Good morning, council members. For the record, my name is Amal Alwood. I serve as your chief of police for the Anne Arundel County at large. Thank you for the opportunity this morning to speak on behalf of Bill 1622 pertaining to the Police Accountability Board. I do wish to recognize Mr. Barron for all the hard work and the time he's committed. In addition to all of his staff who's assisted and everyone else involved on behalf of the county exec to get this bill before you today. I promise to be brief but direct. In my more than 30 years of policing, having served now in 3 law enforcement agencies, I've witnessed an unequal devolution in professional policing standards. For example, your Anne Arundel County Police Department is accredited by the Commission of Accreditation for Law Enforcement Agencies, also known as CALEA. That requires agencies to meet an established set of hundreds of professional standards subjected to continuous annual audits. Anne Arundel County is one of only 32 Maryland agencies of the hundreds of police departments throughout the state to have earned this accreditation. And it's one of only 945 throughout the United States. That gold standard in public safety should serve as a source of pride for this agency and this county. Last year, upon CALEA's conclusion of their assessment of our department from our operations, investigations, administration, patrol, and community engagement, they closed our exit interview with the following remarks. We need more Anne Arundels, and they were speaking to the national picture. Words matter, and that's a huge compliment and testament to the character of your Anne Arundel County Police Department. The bill before the council today is designed to meet state-imposed mandates in HB 670, and I recognize and appreciate the difficult and challenging work before the council. The state compulsory deadlines make this bill and these hearings that much more important. Let me be clear, passage of a bill that creates a disciplinary process mandated by the state is critical. Without this bill, effective July 1, there's no means of investigating a complaint made by a member of the public against a police officer. Failure to move forward is unfair to both our officers and the community we serve. It's equally imperative that this bill create a process that's fair, impartial, unbiased, and objective. During a time when retirements and resignations in law enforcement is at an all-time high and recruitment at an all-time low, it's essential for public safety, our community's safety, that we get this right. The state dealt all jurisdictions a hand. We have to play the hand we're dealt. How we play that hand is up to this council. I'm confident, we're all confident in this council's ability to get this right. Thank you for your time and your commitment to ensuring that Anne Arundel County remains a safe place to live and raise all of our families.
All right, thank you very much, Mr. Barron. Thank you, Chief Awad, and the other members of our law enforcement agency that I can see are sitting there with you today. At this time, I'd like to open up the floor for questions to my colleagues. I don't know which is first, so I'm going to go in numerical order. Miss Lacey, we'll go 157. Miss Lacey, you can go proceed.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Sarah Lacey, District 1. I actually think maybe if others have more general questions, they could go first. I've prepared a rough markup of the legislation, and I'd like to go kind of topic by topic, less focused on specific language for everyone to review, but up to you and Ms. Hare and Ms. Fiedler.
I guess that would be fine. So I will move on to Ms. Fiedler, and we'll come back to you, Ms. Lacey.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Amanda Fiedler, District 5. Mr. Barron, I really appreciate that presentation. And if we could get a copy of that just to hold on to for reference, there was some important timeline information in there. My first question, I have a line of questions as well, but I'll only ask one at a time. In section 3-70-103, when membership is discussed, there's a language shall have resided. Is the intent of that section that it is a current resident who has resided for 3 years prior? I just want to make sure I'm understanding that.
Yes, thank you, Ms. Fiedler. Pete Barron with the administration, and a copy of the PowerPoint has already been sent to Ms. Corby and Ms. Cayley, or Ms. Schultz, to with members of the council, and post on the website. To your question around residency, it is our intent that you would be a 3-year resident if you're a current 3-year resident if you are appointed for the county, if current 3-year resident, if you're appointed to the city. I'll defer to Office of Law if we need to tweak language to make sure that that's clear. That was the intent, though.
Ms. Fiedler, just since it sounds like you have a number of questions, you want to go ahead and ask one more while you still got the floor? You're on mute.
There we go. Thank you for that notation, Mr. Barron. I do see I had to click just 2 tabs above where I was to see the presentation, so thank you. My next question is regarding the ex-officio members. Now, just taking a look at the list, I see ex-officio members from, the Chief of Anne Arundel County Police Department or Chief's Designee, Annapolis Police Department, Anne Arundel County Sheriff. That covers the law enforcement organizations that we traditionally think of. There is not a notation for the community college, and I know that this bill applies to them as well. So was there any discussion on including someone from the community college as an ex-officio member? And if there was a discussion, where did you all land? Obviously, it's not in the bill, so.
So this was a hard line to draw. So what first to answer, Pete Barron with the administration, to answer the question first, the administration met with the community college. We've walked through the bill line by line as we have with all council members. I'd have to go back and check my notes. I think the community college was kind of agnostic on whether or not they get a ex-officio seat. I'll double check that. The policy decision the county exec had to make when we were drafting this bill is how do you make sure that the right expertise is there without making the board so large that it becomes unworkable. So we wanted to keep it limited, knowing that the board has a responsibility to meet quarterly with all law enforcement agencies. So the community college would have a direct relationship in coming to those meetings quarterly with the board, and didn't feel that the need was sufficient to put them as an ex-officio. That said, the meetings will be subject to the Open Meetings Act, and obviously anybody, student, administration, law enforcement from the community college would be able to attend the public meeting.
Madam Chair, may I follow up?
Yeah, go ahead and follow up on that one.
Okay, yeah, I won't ask another question. I'll let some of my colleagues go, but I appreciate that answer. I have not yet talked to community college, and as you know, they are located here in District 5, so knowing they were agnostic is very helpful. And I just want to thank Chief Howard for her presentation, and our officers who are here in the room for this important conversation.
Thank you, Ms. Fiedler. Ms. Hare.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Jessica Hare, District 7. I think this is a question for the chief, because I'm looking at this, and Mr. Barron's presentation, one of the slides talked about how annually the review board would have to report to the county on trends and disciplinary process and recommendations on changes to policies. And I guess my question is, right now, what's the process on developing these policies and changes to them? Because I am sure that it is much deeper and broader than any of us necessarily understand. And maybe the general public would be helped by knowing kind of how you go about that process now.
So all of our policies are based on the law, whether federal, local law. And then we tend to benchmark other departments throughout the country to look for best practices. And beyond that, we tend to lean on our American policing think tanks like the International Association of Chiefs of Police and the Police Executive Research Forum, in addition to our own Maryland Police Training and Standards Commission. So generally there are frameworks that are provided, and we build those frameworks out to specifically address or customize it to our respective jurisdictions. But I'll pitch to Major Ross Passman, who quite frankly is our policy writer within the department.
Hi, Major Ross Passman. Yes, the chief's right. The other unique thing is that within the state of Maryland, there's an association of police planners that we share with other jurisdictions. We look for best practices where we all are kind of on the same page, and especially since this is so specific. And the LEOBR, the previous LEOBR was specific also, but we all kind of get on the same page to make sure that we're all have the same policies in place, especially by July 1st.
Madam Chair, could I ask one follow-up?
Go ahead.
Thank you. So with that, how do you envision this new process kind of meshing with the existing one?
I think that it would be fair to have a subject matter expert in the room who can speak to his or her experience in writing not just any policy, but policy specific to the profession in law enforcement. Without that presence, I don't know how a board who does not have the experience in either writing policy or having been a police officer, how they understand the law or how policy is written specifically for the police departments. And I do believe it may have been the General Assembly's intent to make certain that, you know, throughout the state, we're all consistent with our policies. Would that be a fair assessment? I hope that answers your question.
It does. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Ms. Lacey, are you ready to dig into some of your topics?
I am. Thank you, Madam Chair. So first one, I want to point out, I'm preparing amendments, but I have them written in a rough notation. So that's what I'm going to be going through, and I'll try to stick to the ones I think we might want to have some discussion about. On page 3 of the bill, in paragraph 37A103A4, that's about the voting membership. One of the qualifications for the voting membership is, as drafted, the voting membership of the PAB shall include representation from communities that experience a higher frequency of interactions with law enforcement. I plan to propose to amend that to say the voting membership of the Police Accountability Board shall include representation from communities that historically experienced or currently experience a higher frequency of interactions with law enforcement compared to surrounding communities. I think it's important that we explicitly acknowledge how we are trying to ensure the accountability board is representing those communities, and so we should spell it out. So that's the first one.
If I may, Madam Chair.
Go ahead, Mr. Barron.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you, Councilwoman Lacey, for sharing your thoughts. And I know we're going to have a lot of conversation in the coming days and weeks. The one thing I will say that the administration completely agrees that the Police Accountability Board needs to ensure that it has membership that includes perspectives of communities that are historically affected. The drafting of that language was intended to be a little bit broader than the change you're proposing. We wanted to also signal communities that maybe not be geographic or racial, but also communities of folks who suffer from mental illness historically see a higher interaction with law enforcement. So having experience and expertise available for folks who are familiar with the unique challenges of that community, we felt was important. So that was the intent. Happy to work on wordsmithing this section.
Thank you, Madam Chair.
Yes, can I jump in for one quick second? Just a point that might be helpful for everyone. Ms. Lacey, I understand that you actually have a mock draft. Would it be all right if we put that on the screen? I think that might help, that might help everyone understand a little bit more about the discussion. Is that okay with you? Or if not, we can proceed like this. If you feel like you're not, if that document is not ready for prime time, I fully understand.
Thank you. I prefer not to put that up yet as we're going and as we're having this discussion to avoid introducing any confusion. So, so I think just to summarize that last point, I think, Mr. Barron, what I hear you saying is that historically experienced or currently experiencing is consistent with what the administration is seeing as an important characteristic or potential characteristic of a voting member, but that compared to surrounding communities limits it too much beyond what you are envisioning.
I think that's accurate.
Okay. And so the second thing I wanted to bring up is on page 4, paragraph 6(2). This is the bar, basically, or prohibition on a person being appointed as a voting member of the board if they have been convicted of a crime of violence, etc. And as I read this, this is a total bar. If they have ever been convicted or, you know, of a crime of violence or of theft, dishonesty, fraud, or another crime of moral turpitude. My question is, you know, do we really intend to bar people for life from potentially serving on the board? I'm concerned this may be unfairly broad, and I'd like us to have a discussion.
Madam Chair.
Mr. Barron, if you'd like to respond, go ahead.
I can. I think it's a worthy discussion to have. I will tell you, in the discussions with communities and advocates, there were folks that wanted no restriction. There were folks that wanted much stronger restrictions than what the administration put forward. We think it's very important that crimes of violence and crimes of theft, dishonesty, and moral turpitude be an absolute bar to the board. There is language in the paragraph below that as it relates to other crimes would not be a bar. So somebody who has, for example, a small drug charge when they were 20, they're now 60, that shouldn't be a bar, right? And again, to remind the council, the appointments who come before to sit on this board will also go through the confirmation process of the county council. It's our intent, like we have on other boards, to provide all the documentation that was used in vetting folks. So you would be able to see that petty crime that may have happened when somebody was 20 and now they're 40 and have their doctorate in, you know, something might be a worthy add to the board. So our policy preference is how we drafted the bill, to sum that up.
Okay, Madam Chair, can I ask one more question?
Yes, go ahead.
Thank you. So understanding that, I do want to return to the topic of the ex-officio members. That's the next big thing on my list. I'm kind of wondering, from the discussion that we've just had a bit earlier, whether we actually should include ex-officio members at all, given that the intent is for this board to follow the Open Meetings Act. I have noted for myself a potential amendment of adding a 6th ex-officio member that would be the president of the Anne Arundel County chapter of the NAACP, or that president's designee. I've also heard from our FOP friends that, you know, they'd like to have an ex-officio member on the board. And I'm just starting to wonder if this isn't sort of mushrooming beyond control or helpfulness to the board, that we should talk about that too.
Sure.
And Mr. Barron, if you'd like to respond.
I thank you. And Councilwoman Lacey, I think that's a very important point. The creation of ex-officio was suggested in our early planning process as it relates to providing that subject matter expertise, right? Because the state law prohibits an active law enforcement officer from being on the board. You're going to be advising law enforcement on policies and procedures, and yet you might not have the basic knowledge of what our men and women on our force go through every day, which is also in part why we added some training requirements, but nothing is a substitute for real world experience. So to your point on, is this mushrooming? We made a conscious decision that the folks who are appointed as ex-officio are county or local government employees, not general public members. And I think our preference would be if the council wants to start, as you say, mushrooming and adding, well, if this group is on, then we need to add this group. And if that group's on, then we need to add 3 more. If the council thinks that we should start adding groups and the administration didn't get this ex officio part right, we would probably prefer striking it entirely than adding a whole bunch of organizations. And then the board, remember, it's a 9-person board, and we already have 5 ex officio. You pretty quickly could have a board that's overweighted with ex officio. Even though they can't vote, they could dominate conversation. So our preference is to leave it as is, but if the council, I think this is a worthy discussion, and it's one we struggled with internally, is how do you make sure this board has the proper subject matter experts as it relates to both bias issues, equity issues, as well as law enforcement. And we think we struck that balance, but I know other people don't. So happy to continue that conversation.
All right, let's move along to a different council member. And Ms. Lacey, of course, we can come back to you if you have other points you'd like to discuss. Ms. Fiedler.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Amanda Fiedler, District 5. Mr. Barron, I'm going to piggyback on your comment about no substitute for real life experience. And this is a conversation that I was very appreciative that we had in our one-on-one meeting on this legislation. So in the training section of the bill, it does reference the Civilian Police Academy, which is an 11-week course, 3 hours, 1 day a week. But that's really a kind of a classroom setting, which I think is critically important as well, because then you learn the ins and outs and techniques and what's appropriate and all of that. But what that doesn't give you is that real life experience. And I know I'm still talking about my ride along from 2019. It gives you a ride along, gives you a perspective that you just cannot compare. And I know it's not in the legislation, but is that something that the administration would be open to adding some kind of component of requirement?
Madam Chair.
Go ahead.
Pete Barron again with the administration. Great point, Councilwoman Fiedler. I think a number of your colleagues are also thinking along the same lines. The administration has no objection to including a more robust training requirement, such as a ride along. I've heard from some folks that we might want to require this annually. I've heard from some folks we might want to make sure that it's geographically diverse, that, you know, if you do a ride along with Arundel County Police in the Eastern District this time, right, next time you shouldn't go back to the Eastern, you should go maybe to a ride along with Annapolis or another district. So that's just our preference is to work with us as we write it to make sure that it's robust enough, but we would be supportive of an additional requirement, as long as it doesn't get to be like you have to do a ride along a month. That would probably be too burdensome.
All right, I would actually like to jump in and ask a question, and this may go to the Office of Law, but maybe Mr. Barron, you're able to answer this question as well. So this relates to the Administrative Charging Committee, and there are a number of powers outlined in the state law that that are not mentioned in our law, but my understanding is that admin's position is that it is not relevant, that they're not mentioned in our county law, that they still have those powers because they are laid out in the state law. But my question, and that's something I may be bringing an amendment for just for the sake of clarity, but I have a question about timing. So on the PowerPoint that you went through with us, which was very helpful, by the way, one of the things that I noted was that the Administrative Charging Committee looked at the file before making a decision about whether or not the person would be charged or whether the person would not be charged. However, the Administrative Charging Committee also is the same body that holds some of those powers, such as bringing an officer before, before their body. They have subpoena power. Those are probably the biggest ones worth mentioning. Are, in your understanding, or again, this could be for Office of Law, are those powers to be exercised alongside with their review of the file? Or are those powers to be exercised once a decision to charge has been made and only if a decision to charge has been made?
Pete Barron with the administration. I think that's a fantastic question or questions. I'll give you the answer to the first one. When we drafted this bill, we understood what we were doing as incorporating state law HB 670 into the state. Tripped over my words. The state law applies as it relates to administrative charging committee and trial board powers to the county. It was our understanding what we were doing. We didn't need to bring it into our code because they exist as state law. We would be comfortable. I know there's been some discussion of including a reference or bringing some of that language into our code. I think that is a worthy discussion for clarity and helping to make sure the public understands how HB 670 works. I mean, we had to create a whole flow chart so that just I could understand it. So what we want to do is work with you if there is going to be some language changes. As to the timing of how the investigatory process would work, it's my understanding as the Administrative Charging Committee is making their review, they could ask, hey, law enforcement agency, we need more information. Or, hey, we want to talk to the officer, or hey, we need to issue a few subpoenas. But I defer to the subject matter experts on this. So maybe Ms. Blair Klausmeyer or Mr. Hunt or our chief could weigh in on their understanding of how 670's administrative charging committees will process a complaint. So Ms. Blair Klausmeyer, maybe.
I can go first, and Mr. Hunt can jump in. I think the question that, if I'm understanding correctly, is the status of the investigatory file in relation to what the Administrative Charging Committee does. And the way I read it is that law enforcement investigation is part of what I call it the ACC, Administrative Charging Committee, would actually review as in determining whether or not the officer should be disciplined. So it is part of it. It's it's not held aside or anything like that. It's part of their what they look at in determining how to proceed.
So I think I'm asking a very similar question, a related question. To me, it's clear that their job is to review the file, to review the investigation that's been conducted by the law enforcement agency. But what I'm curious to, as your opinion, are they also allowed, while they're conducting that review, before they make a decision to charge or not charge, are they also able to exercise the powers that are outlined in HB 670, such as, going back to the law enforcement agency and asking for more information or asking for additional information? So are those powers part of the pre-charge investigation, or those something that would only happen once there is a charge, if there is a charge?
I believe they're part of the pre-charge investigation.
Okay, thank you for sharing that opinion.
And I'll ask Mr. Hunt if he agrees with that.
I absolutely do. If you look at House Bill 670, the portion that is going to be effective July 1st, Public Safety Article 3104E gives the Administrative Charging Committee the power to determine whether or not an officer is administratively charged. And then if you go down to Section F, it says, in executing its duties in accordance with subsection E, an Administrative Charging Committee may request information or action from the law enforcement agency that conducted the investigation, including requiring additional investigation and issuance of subpoenas. So that's I read
Mr.
that
Hunt,
as,
I happen to have it open. Can you give me a page number if you have it?
yes, it's page 36, lines 8 and 9.
All right. Thank you. I will take a look and look at that more closely. I appreciate both of you weighing in on my question. And let's see, how about we'll go Ms. Lacey, maybe another point or two, and Ms. Fiedler, another question or two.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I do have two related points about the composition of the board. So at the end of page 4, it's section 104 about the chair. I plan to propose an amendment that there will be a chair and a vice chair. I think given the duties of the chair, it would be important to have a designated backup. I think that given all the vetting that these 9 folks are going to go through, that I think the board should be entrusted with the decision to vote for its own chair and vice chair. I know that's not apparently what the administration prefers, but if you could perhaps explain more why you would prefer to have the county executive designate the chair and have the county council vote on that yet again.
Yeah, so one, we think it's important check on the executive branch, that the legislative branch is involved in the selection of the chair. I'm going to ask Office of Law to speak to it, but it's our understanding that state law requires us together to appoint the chair. And maybe that's a Mr. Hunter or Ms. Blair Klaus question. That's correct.
Okay, well, in that case, if it is required that we follow that process, is there any problem with requiring a vice chair in that context?
There would be nothing.
We don't have any issue with
okay.
There's nothing that would prohibit a vice chair under state law, as we understand.
Okay, great. So the second membership question I want to discuss is in the removal section on the next page. Speaking of that, the balance of power between the county executive and the county council, I'm considering 2 potential amendments. One that would require the county executive to give notice of the removal of a member of the board, the reason therefore and the effective date thereof, to the chairs of the board and the county council within a specified period of time of the removal. And the second possibility would be that the county council might have the ability by a resolution approved by 5 members to reinstate a removed member of the board. And I say that as general concept, not as I don't have specific language for those things, but I want to put them out there for discussion.
Madam Chair.
Go ahead.
Baron again. It's an interesting idea. I think it's worthy of discussion. It is not our intent was to provide separation from the political process once the board has to do its work, right? That's why we put in removal for cause. I don't think we would have a problem initially. I want to vet it through, but conceptually, the idea that the council can, by a supermajority, reinstate somebody is probably a worthy discussion. And I can't think of anything right now that we would strongly object to a change like that. But I think we need to get that language right if we're going to do it. So happy to work with you to flush out so that we can get to, instead of a squishy yes, a hard yes.
All right, Ms. Fiedler.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Amanda Fiedler, District 5. Mr. Barron, I'm going to reference the slide that you showed at the very beginning of this discussion. When you were talking about trial boards, it was noted in the slide, multiple in the county. I have a question mark on my notes on that. Can you clarify, because I thought it was, is it not one trial board, and where in the legislation is that noted?
So in HB 670, I think it's implicit in it that the chief of the law enforcement agency that the officer, the complaint is subject, where the officer is, who's subject to the complaint is employed, would necessitate that if the complaint deals with Annapolis police, or it would be an Annapolis appointee. If it was in Arundel, it would be an Arundel appointee. And then there's also additional language at the state level as it relates to who's sort of in charge of conducting the trial boards. And that is the actual the proceeding itself, I believe, and I'm hoping for Office of Law to rescue me, I believe is the LEA, the law enforcement agency that the officer comes from. Is that correct? Or Miss Lori Blair Klausmeyer shook her head no.
Oh no, I didn't shake my head. I'm sorry. I think the notion is that the trial board is not a permanent kind of sitting commission. It would be formed each time it's needed. So because you're involving retired judges and that sort of thing, and again, and it's going to be related to the law enforcement agency that is involved. There's one administrative charging committee, but ultimately, if you get to the trial board, then that trial board is then constituted as needed, is my understanding. Mr. Hunt can correct me if he thinks I'm way off base on that. But
no, I think Ethan Hunt, Office of Law, I think Ms. Blair Klausmeyer is absolutely correct. Public Safety Article 3106 says that each law enforcement agency will establish a trial board process. So it's on an agency by agency basis. And again, as needed, because not every complaint of misconduct from a member of the public will move past the administrative charging committee, right? If an officer is exonerated or the complaint is found to be unsubstantiated, and even those complaints that are substantiated, the officer has the option to accept the discipline imposed by the chief. So it really is on a case by case basis.
Madam Chair, may I ask a follow-up?
Right. Do you mind if I ask one? No, go ahead, Ms. Fiedler. And I'd like to ask one too. I'm going to put myself in the line because it's on this very topic.
Okay, thank you. So in the circumstance where one trial board meets, convenes, goes through a process on one complaint, there's no meeting necessary for however long, could the same exact individuals be called upon if they are needed again, or does it have to be a new panel of individuals?
A great question. Pete Barron with the administration. It's a great question, council member. We understand that it could be the same people, but it would be a trial board for this matter, right? This separate matter. And before, Madam Chair, before we get to your question, I just want to flag, I have a couple of people on the screen who have some hard stops. I think Pete Hill and Asha Smith have existing meetings that they have to get out of here for. So if you see people drop off, it's feel free to shoot us emails if you have questions for any of us, and we'll make sure that if somebody's not here, they get back to you.
Thank you. I appreciate that, and certainly understand the idea of hard stops. But I wanted to jump in here on the trial board, the composition of the trial board, because if I am recalling and reading correctly, the trial board also has to participate in the various trainings that have been mentioned. And so if we're convening a new group of, just a new group of people every time we have a trial board, wouldn't that almost by its nature cause a pretty significant delay if we're saying you need to go through this 13-week training, you need to participate in this training, you need to participate in this training, and then, end up, that 13 weeks by itself is, basically 3 months. So help me understand, or maybe I'm incorrect, that they are required to go through that training.
They are required, Pete Barron with the administration, they are required to do training, but that training is going to be prescribed by the Maryland Police Training and Standards Commission. They aren't subject to the training outlined in 1622. I know it's super confusing. The training outlined in 1622 relates to the Police Accountability Board. So it's our folks that'll have to go through the training that we prescribe here under the Police Accountability Board. But if you are serving on a trial board, you would be subject to different training requirements that are being promulgated by the state. And I think Office of Law nodded their head affirmatively when I said that. So they would not necessarily have
Okay.
training academy.
But they would have some training. And do we have any, I know that's a state regulatory piece that is largely unknown, but do we have any sense of what that training would entail, the length of time required to complete, et cetera?
I know they are in the middle of drafting regulations now. I don't believe we have anything that we can say definitively what it'll look like, but Mr. Hunt has been following that closely.
I think Ethan Hunt with the Office of Law, Mr. Barron's absolutely correct. We don't have an idea of the timeline. I believe there already is training. Some other jurisdictions allow civilians on trial boards, and so there is some training out there that the Training and Standards Commission has developed. I'm not sure if the training they're developing under 670 will be that training or something more extensive. And obviously, if the police department has any insight or additional comments, I'd welcome that.
Chief Awad, if you or any of your colleagues would like to respond.
We're looking it up, but to my knowledge, we're not aware of that training has even been completed by the Maryland Police Training Commission just yet. I know that we're in constant communication with them, obviously monthly. In our last update, the training in terms of the elements of the training have not been identified just yet. But we have a Major Passman just double checking for us.
Okay, I greatly appreciate that. And I'm going to go ahead and go on to Ms. Hare, but if Major Passman has something, if you discover something that you would like to share, just put your hand up and I'll call on you again so you can put that in the conversation. Ms. Hare.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Jessica Hare, District 7. I had two questions, and actually one is along these lines, so maybe I'll just ask this one first. So do we envision then that there might be a pool of people who've completed the training in advance before the first trial board is ever convened to select from? Or is this, because I am concerned about kind of the amount of time, whatever the training is, and the amount of time that might take, is there going to be 10, 20, 30, however many people that the Administrating Charging Committee is selecting from for the trial board? I mean, just from a practical standpoint, will that piece take place in advance?
Pete Barron with
Do we not know?
No, so it is the administration's intent that as we are going through these next couple months, we are identifying judges who would be willing to do it. Okay. And recall, one of the positions on the trial board is an officer of equal rank appointed by the chief of the law enforcement agency. So presumably that officer has already been trained. And then the civilian who is appointed by the Police Accountability Board, that pool will have to be developed by the Accountability Board. And it's partly why we intend to have an executive director to provide the staff level support for the Accountability Board to do that kind of pool building, I guess you could say. So the administration would stand by to support that, but the biggest pool will need somebody who would need real new training, maybe from scratch, is a civilian who the Accountability Board appoints, not the administration or not the council. So we would stand ready to help the board, but we've got to form the board first, if that's helpful.
That's helpful. Thank you. Madam Chair, I have one other question about something Councilwoman Lacey.
Go for it.
Okay, Councilwoman Lacey, I wanted to return back to your idea about an elected chair and vice chair, because I think it's an interesting idea. And Ms. Klausmeyer, what your response, I think if I heard you correctly, was that the state law requires that the county executive and the council work together. But does the state law require that the county executive make the appointment subject to council approval, or does it just require that we work together? Because I would think we could work together to give them the ability to elect their chair and vice chair if the second is the case.
Lori Blair, class on Deputy County Attorney. So the state law 3-102 B1I3 says that the local governing body shall appoint a chair of the PAB who has relevant experience to the position. And then we look to the definition of local governing body under our charter, which is the county executive would nominate and the council would approve. So
perfect.
Thank you. Have to do it that way. Yep.
Okay. Thank you. I appreciate that.
I'm going to jump in again here with just with an idea that kind of maybe melds those two together, is to allow the board to make a recommendation as who they would like to be their chair. And then hopefully the county executive and the council could follow through. So throwing that idea out there for discussion, I will go on to Ms. Lacy.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I was just thinking the same idea that you had, and I think Ms. Hare was nodding too, so maybe we can pursue that idea. I have just 3 more points. One is following up on the questions about the appointments that are made by the PAB. So this is at the bottom of page 6 of the bill. The PAB shall appoint members to the Administrative Charging Committee and trial boards. And so they have a certain number of appointments, as we've discussed. The Administrative Charging Committee has 2 appointments that are to be made by the PAB and 1 for every trial board. My proposal is that all of those appointments should be made from among members of the PAB. So the PAB should be choosing members of the PAB, and except that they couldn't choose the 2 members who are already on the ACC, I should say 3 members, because it's the chair or their designee plus 2 civilian members. So they couldn't choose any of those 3 people, and they couldn't choose someone who they had currently put on a trial board to be on another trial board. But given the 9 members that we have, it seems to me that we might be able to efficiently address some of the training and timing issues that we have if all members of the PAB received all the training that was necessary, and then they were sort of ready to go to be chosen to fill those roles. So that's my first point. I'll pause there.
Pete Barron.
Go ahead, Pete. When you're finished, Pete, I want to jump over to, I see Chief Awad has her hand up, and I believe maybe that means Major Passman found us some information. So Pete, and then I'm gonna hop over to Major Passman.
Well, if it's Major Passman, if the chief has something to say on Councilman Lacy's question, I'm gonna let her go first. Or if this is on Major Passman's point, we can come back to it.
Yes, that's correct, Bill. We have a response from the Executive Director of the Mountain Police Training and Standards Committee, and essentially he said that there is no training that has been developed as of yet. So there you have it.
Thank you. Mr. Barron, go ahead.
So I'll go back to Councilwoman Lacy's question. So our understanding of the state law, it requires that the PAB appoint voting members to serve on the Administrative Charging Committee. We think this might be a little problematic to limit who the ACC can appoint to who the Police Accountability Board can appoint to the ACC. So the state law says the Police Accountability Board's chair or the chair's designee, who is a member of the Accountability Board, serves on the charging committee. And then the Police Accountability Board appoints 2 civilian members. Now the Accountability Board could choose to appoint 2 members who also are civilians on the Police Accountability Board, but we're a little concerned about limiting them to those appointments who are already on the board. Although I recognize Ms. Lacy's efficiency argument here, and it very well may be that the Accountability Board chooses its own members to appoint. We don't feel that we can mandate, however, that they choose their members.
So I guess in response to that, Mr. Barron, I purposely have not yet drafted an amendment to say that the county executives 2 civilian members must come from the PAB. I think that would take your point to the next level of, overall having too many people come from the PAB. But I thought in balance, allowing, keeping this overall, as I understand the statute to be requiring this PAB becomes a pool of expertise that we've talked about. So it makes sense to say that the folks they appoint, they shouldn't need to do any looking beyond their own membership to find new members to serve on the ACC or a trial board. But the county executive is perfectly positioned to do that. And so that's where I'm coming from on that point.
So if I can respond, we would also make the same argument. The state law says the county executive shall appoint civilian members. We don't think you can limit that.
Exactly. That's why I'm not trying to. So moving on, the next point I wanted to bring up is on the executive director. I heard in several conversations, and I'm sure many of my colleagues also heard, and the administration heard, that it is very important to certain groups that the PAB have its own independent counsel. So I will be proposing that the executive director role shall be an attorney in good standing with the state of Maryland who has at least 3 years of professional experience relevant to the duties of the board, and that the executive director shall supervise staff assigned to the board, procure and manage contractual services as needed for investigation of complaints, and provide legal counsel to the board.
Pete Barron with the administration again. I think we'll work with you, Councilman, on some of those details, but I will say I am a bit jealous that I didn't think of this first. Everybody loves the idea that we've talked to of including a requirement that the executive director have this kind of training. So we really do like the idea. Let's discuss how we actually structure it, but we're supportive.
Well, excellent. Okay, so we might disagree on my very last point that I'll bring up just quickly. On page 7 of the bill, in the section on complaints and what a complaint must contain, as I read HB 670, the requirements of what must be included with a complaint is a non-exclusive list. And I'm aware from reading HB 670 that at some point, the legislature struck the requirement that a complaint be made under penalty of perjury. I haven't gotten any, further into the research to understand why they did that, but it really concerns me. Nobody has a right to lie in a complaint that they file, with whether it's with the police department or any public body. And I think this is actually really necessary. People may have differences of opinion, but I think it's really not the heart of this requirement, or the fact that they took it out in the legislature is not about people being intimidated, too intimidated to file their complaint. In fact, since the law provides that somebody else can file your complaint for you, there are ways that a complainant's identity could be protected, so that there's no concern about retaliation, but I think we flatly can't allow people to file false complaints. And if a false complaint is filed, and it's found in the ACC investigation process, for example, this complaint was completely unsubstantiated. Well, then if the complaint was made under penalty of perjury, then that's a basis for and the accused, a falsely accused officer, to seek relief and as appropriate in our justice system. So I will be urging my colleagues to include this requirement, assuming it's not the Office of Law's opinion that we're not allowed to include it.
Pete Barron, again with the administration. I think we do need some more research on this. The administration strongly agrees with you that complaints should not include falsehoods, and would like to explore this more with you. our initial read of the state law, though, does indicate that we are handcuffed. But let's keep talking about it, because the goal you're getting at is something that I think the administration would strongly agree with. The question is, are we able to? And there's some legislative history here that indicate that it was removed for a reason, and the state doesn't want, the state law doesn't authorize us to go beyond and add additional barriers for complaints, whether we like it or not. But let's have a discussion about it, because it's a important piece of 670, and it's an important piece of our bill.
All right, thank you very much. Ms. Fiedler.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Amanda Fiedler, District 5. I think it's apparent and clear that the significance and complexity of this bill is quite large. I do want to go back to just one topic that I've touched on in my last few lines of questioning, the trial boards, because we talked about, training and how often they meet. Just for point of reference, under the current process, in an annual basis, how many trial board meetings do we have? Are there a ton, or what does that look like?
Okay, thank you. Very few, although I don't have that the number right ahead of me. I'd say under 3 annually, if that.
Yeah, we're 0.
Or zero. Could be 0.
Okay, thank you.
And just to remind you, Councilman Fiedler, our chief is here. This section would also capture the other law enforcement agencies. So I know we do have some folks from the city. If Rhonda or Carrie, if you know that offhand, for the city, but I think we would have to look at the entire law enforcement community in the county. It's not just related to us.
I certainly understand, and that information would be greatly appreciated. And I know, we can't really estimate the future, but just to know for discussion's sake what that looks like, that would be helpful.
Rhonda McCoy for Annapolis Police Department. We had 1 trial board last year.
Thank you for chiming in. All right, I don't see any more hands from my colleagues, but I just have one other idea that I'm playing around with that I wanted to just sort of put my colleagues on notice as a possible amendment. And this is regarding the membership of the Police Accountability Board. Currently, the 9 members, basically we've got the county executive appointing, actually, Mr. Barron, help me out. How many does the county executive appoint?
The county executive would appoint 8 and bring them to the county council. The mayor and city council of Annapolis would appoint 1.
Okay, so my suggestion that I'm thinking of bringing forward is in an amendment would be to actually have the county executive appoint 1 and have each council member appoint 1 and the city of Annapolis still appoint 1. Just in order to, obviously this is a very charged topic. My ultimate goal, and I hope this is everyone's goal, is that this is a fair process, is as fair a possible process to an officer who might be investigated, might be ultimately charged, and to a person who may be bringing a complaint. And I think I think we could achieve better balance on the board itself if we spread the responsibility out to the council members to make appointments as well. So anyway, I'm considering that amendment. Just wanted to throw that out there. And Mr. Barron, if you'd like to respond.
I would, in fact, because this was something that we discussed internally at length. In other boards and commissions, we've done councilmatic appointments. Our preference here is to leave this as is. This board has to work together as one body. If you draw people from and limit pools, even though you might not technically limit them for the council district, you're limiting and putting 7 different opinions on who should be on this board, and each picking one, it could lead to a board being weighted. Our preference is to have the council vote on the appointments, absolutely, and work with council members to find and recruit folks. But by making it subject to parochial political interests, we are a little concerned. And I will add that, and this is not a knock on council members at all, because the administration struggles to recruit and retain board members for all sorts of boards and commissions. There are many times that I've emailed members of the council saying, hey, help me find somebody, and we don't. So I just want to be cognizant of how difficult of a job that appointing members to the board will be. And we need to make sure that we're able to recruit folks, and having 7 recruiters out there is going to be helpful. But having one body responsible is our preference. So that was a long, rambly answer, because I wasn't expecting this proposal, but I hope you understand.
I thought of it midway through the meeting, and I think it's interesting that you would feel that the council appointment might be more subject to parochial political interest than appointments by a single county executive, but that is, very understandable given our relative points of view. And I will tell you that actually long before the state even passed this House Bill 670, I had individuals reaching out to say, how could they participate in this when this ultimately happens? So I actually suspect we will not have any shortage of people interested in participating, even though, that is the case for other boards. I think this is a very, it's a topic that it gathers a lot of public interest and a lot of public scrutiny. So anyway, with that, seeing no other hands from my colleagues, we do actually have a few other items of business on our agenda today, but I want to say thank you very much to Chief Awad and the members and her colleagues for participating. We appreciate your time here. We appreciate the attorneys who have dug through this law. We appreciate Mr. Barron, who has dug through this law, combed through this law to learn all the ins and outs. And if I didn't mention you, it's probably because I didn't know exactly what your role was, but I know that everybody is here has been involved. And actually, I'll mention Ms. McCoy from the city as well for participating. So thank you, everyone who helped work on this, probably one of the most complex bills that we've had before us as a council. So thank you for your time, and we'll surely see you again soon. All right, moving on, we have next, this is another not nearly as exciting bill, water master plan for water and sewer, bill number 17-22. Mr. Barron, this is another admin bill. You have the floor.
Just trying to find my notes. Hold on one second. Okay, yeah, 1722 is the master plan for water supply and sewage system. This is an amendment to that plan. The reason we're bringing forward this amendment, it relates, we need to include the future Two Rivers school site in the master plan, as there's some requirements for state funding that it be included in the plan. So while we will be bringing forward a full water master plan for water and sewer at some point in the near future, we felt it was important as it relates to the state requirements to amend the plan right now for the current school site. And I've got Mr. Shagnovich here and Ms. Kelly Kenny from the Office of Law if you have further questions on this, but we'll ask you to move this bill at the appropriate time. And Ms. Lori Rhodes is here too.
I see Councilwoman Hare's hand up. You may have the floor.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Jessica Hare, District 7. Only to say that, Madam Chair, I find these bills very exciting, the sewer and water ones.
I did not mean any disrespect to water and sewer. Obviously, it is a very important facet of every single one of our lives. If it weren't here, we would notice very, very quickly. Mr. Saknovich, go ahead.
Thank you. We also find it equally exciting, Alex Chekno, Chief Operating Officer. But as Mr. Barron said, this will make us eligible for approximately $14.9 million of state funding towards the school. That state funding could not come absent this bill. So we urgently ask your indulgence and support. But more importantly, for those of us that are familiar with that part of West County, it is a very environmentally sensitive area. There are significant wetlands and other environmentally sensitive areas surrounding that. And certainly we don't want a school with 550 youngsters on a septic system. So both for environmental considerations and for $14.9 million of state money, we would request your support. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Saknovich. And now I really just have to eat my original comments. 14 point something million, over 14 million is definitely something not to sneeze at. So we will definitely be giving this serious consideration. Seeing no additional hands, we will move on to bill number 19-22. And again, this is another admin bill. Mr. Barron, you have the floor.
Are we skipping 18?
Wait, I am so sorry. No, we are absolutely not skipping 18.
Good, because 18 is a pretty important bill. I have Mr. Taru and Ms. Blair Klausmeyer. 1822 establishes an opioid abatement special revenue fund to hold the county's share of a national settlement with the opioid industry. As you've all probably seen in the news, some drug companies are being held responsible for some of the damage they did, and counties are getting money payouts. Estimate is Maryland subdivisions could receive up to 337 million that will be distributed across the state, and so we need to have a place for that money to land when the county gets its share. That is the purpose of 1822, and I hope you will pass the bill at the appropriate time. And Mr. Taru or Ms. Blair Klausmeyer can give you any additional details.
All right, seeing no questions from my colleagues, maybe this one is just a slam dunk. Bill number 19-22, Mr. Barron again, County Executive Bill.
Yep, I think I might still have Matt Johnston here. We also have Don Ergo, Dale Uster, and Christine Anderson from Central Services, if they've made it this long into the meeting. Ms. Glory Blair Klausmeyer is sticking with us. 1922 approves an agreement between the county and Glen Burnie Solar LLC for the purchase of the energy output from a constructed solar facility. You'll recall that this is the Glen Burnie landfill solar project. So this would be a deal where the county is expected to save about 2.8 million in electricity costs over the 25 years. And that is in addition to the $3 million in lease revenue the council secured in the county from the county executives bill 1221, which guaranteed the annual lease payment for the use of the landfill land, the retired landfill. And so
are there any questions from my colleagues? You'd ask us to move the bill?
I'd ask you to move the bill.
All right. Seeing no questions from my colleagues, we will move on to bill number 20-22. Make sure I get hungry and I start to skip numbers. So I think that's what's going on here. But this is Mr. Pruski is the lead sponsor on this bill. And because he had to leave for a pre-existing appointment, he emailed me a statement that I would like to share with the council, or I'd like to read to the council regarding this bill. The salaries, so this is regarding council salaries. The Salary Standard Commission, which is a citizen group of representatives, met to review the Anne Arundel County Council salaries and benefits. The commission charge was to review future county council salary and compensation. By law, the council cannot raise their own salary and benefits. This bill does not increase or change current salary and benefits of the current council members. The recommendations being put forward are directly from the commission. Again, this decision impacts members who will serve as members of the next Anne Arundel County Council. This report by the commission is a public document and can be reviewed, as is the bill. So I guess Mr. Pruski is not here to answer questions, but I added myself as a co-sponsor, as I believe did, is Ms. Fiedler on this? Ms. Pickard is also on this bill, if I'm correct. Again, I'm shifting multiple tabs here. Yes, Ms. Pickard. So if there's any, I guess, well, let's see, since this is strictly a council issue, I think that would be not customary for the administration to respond. Is that?
That's why I turned my camera off.
All right, thank you, Mr. Barron. Any questions from my colleagues? All right, well, looks like we will be discussing that in a future legislative session. Finally, our last bill on the agenda today is bill number 21-22. This is Ms. Fiedler's bill, and if Ms. Fiedler, you would like to discuss it, give us a little overview, you may have the floor.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Amanda Fiedler, District 5. Feels a little surreal to be talking about this bill, as I first started working on it in September of 2019. This bill addresses an issue that has been attempted to be addressed by previous councils, cluster development. Cluster development, just for information's sake, is a unique way to think of development by allowing development to occur on developable land, but only using a portion of the land for the actual development, thereby preserving portion for environmental purposes, open space, natural features. In all presentations of what the ideal community or development would look like, it's a very careful and delicate balance that has a beautiful outcome. But as we know, with certain areas of our code, we have to go back and address as issues come up in the actual implementation of the intended legislation. And what has happened in areas of the 5th District, I was very appreciative to get a drive around by community leadership, is what I believe is not the intended outcome of cluster development. So we've addressed in this bill some of those areas that need to be tightened up in the conditions. But just to give an overview, the term cluster is sprinkled throughout the code. That can be confusing and cumbersome to wade through. So the definition for cluster as it currently exists in Article 18 has been repealed in this bill, moved into the more appropriate location in our code, which is Article 17, and expands upon the definition to really what the intent of cluster development is. Language for modifications that are not permitted has also been moved to a new subsection and adds the requirement that a modification for open space may not be approved. Cluster is then added to the residential use chart as a conditional use for RA, RLD, R1, R2, and R5, and then adds the condition adds conditions including bulk regulations. And just to give an overview of the bulk regulation changes, maximum individual lot coverage by structures is adjusted, as well as the front lot line, which is increased by 2 feet if parking is allocated in the front of a parcel, increases the rear lot line setbacks to 15 feet in all residential zones, and increases setbacks from side lot lines in RA and RLD. This has been a long time coming, and I'm happy to answer any questions. I might defer to the experts in land use at the appropriate time.
Thank you for that overview, Ms. Fiedler. Mr. Barron, would you like to respond?
Yeah, Pete Barron with the administration. I have Lori Rhodes, our DCAO for land use. Ms. Blair Klausmeyer is stepping up because Ms. Kenny had a previous appointment. And then our OPZ folks, Kai Ziegler and Lynn Miller. The administration has been in discussions. Oops, I almost left the meeting. The administration has been in discussion with the sponsor on this for a while. Appreciate all the back and forth. The impetus for this bill, I think we would all agree, were some really bad decisions as it relates to the previous code, and some folks who all came before us who greenlit modifications and projects that should have never been approved. So the administration has worked with Councilwoman Fiedler to bring this bill forward. We're still sorting through the details, as you'll find with every land use bill, Ms. Fiedler. The details are where the devil lives on this stuff. So we are reviewing it closely. I think we're getting some more feedback than we maybe had initially when the bill was circulated in draft form. And I'm sure we're going to be having some robust discussions on this. Short answer to that long rambly statement is we are supportive of the concept. We might need to turn some knobs around on the bill, and I'm sure this council is going to start to hear from constituents. But generally, cluster development, when done right, can be smart growth. It can enrich communities. It can protect open space. We just had the Green Infrastructure Master Plan. It can help protect natural features. And what we need to do, though, is make sure that we're getting this right. So I think this is going to be a long one, and it's going to take a lot of work on all our part. And I'll turn it over to Miss Lori Rhodes if she has anything to add. And I know we'll become best friends on this bill over the next few weeks.
Good morning, Lori Rhodes, Deputy Chief Administrative Officer for Land Use. I believe Pete Barron, you did a great job kind of summarizing the complexity of trying to balance, these types of developments. Obviously, cluster development regulations were allowed to provide the flexibility for a developer to cluster houses together to preserve open space. There have been bad developments in the past where neighborhoods have been forever changed because those open space and recreational areas were modified. When you start to add in minimum lot sizes and things of that nature, it kind of dilutes the intent of the cluster development, but I understand why those minimum lot sizes were included. So yes, we do probably will have more discussion on this bill as we move forward, and I can turn it over to Lynn or Steve if they have anything to add.
Go ahead, Ms. Fiedler.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Amanda Fiedler, District 5. I neglected, I should say, to recognize that the administration has been very communicative on this legislation from the onset years ago, in actuality. I did want to note that I agree knobs will likely have to be turned. The most challenging part, at least for me, because I am not a land use expert, was the bulk regulation section. So I look forward to the legislative process on this bill and communicating with my colleagues on getting this in its best shape before we take a vote. So thank you.
All right, seeing no additional questions, that was our last bill for discussion today. So thank you to everyone for being here. We will wrap up this meeting and we will see you all again at 7 p.m. on Tuesday, February 22nd. We're meeting on a Tuesday due to the President's Day holiday on Monday, the 21st. So we will see you on Tuesday, February 22nd in the council chambers. Have a wonderful rest of your day and a wonderful rest of your week. Thank you.